your name in Zoom. So we're adding the TAC acronym and then also putting an asterisk. So don't be surprised if your name is edited as we're letting people in. Again, please stay muted as well to avoid background noise. We are going to give people just one more minute here to get settled in and enter into the from the waiting room, and then we will kick off. Great. Juliet, are we set? We're good to go?
Yeah, we're good. We have time. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. We're going to start the meeting of the Technical Advisory Council for the ICARP program at OPR. Thank you again. I want to first note that this meeting is being recorded, so just letting everybody know that we are recording the meeting for note-taking and for records. This is an open public meeting, so we have both council as well as members of the public here, and want to thank everybody for joining. Before I go through and we kick off, I just want to start our meeting here this morning with a land acknowledgement. We at the Office of Planning and Research join you all from Sacramento, California, on the ancestral lands of the Nisenan tribal lands. We thank them for their stewardship of these lands for thousands of years. We also would like to invite you to share the tribal lands that you're joining us from. You can use a link that we will add into the chat here, and you could type the ancestral lands of your location into the chat and share that throughout with the group here today. I just want to note that a land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Native Americans as traditional stewards of this land and the enduring relationship that exists between Native American tribes and their traditional territories. So thank you. So for today's meeting, kicking off, we have a full agenda here today. We are going to run through, as we do with our council meetings, some administrative items up at the top, and then we will move to a very exciting series of updates throughout the day. We will, after approval of the draft minutes, we will do a series of state agency report outs. So the council members who are on and part of the council will give quick updates on some major priorities. There's a lot going on this year, and then we'll have time for brief discussion as well. From there, we are going to do a quick programmatic update from ICARP. We'll report out on all of the things we have moving. And then we will go to a kickoff, which we are very excited about, of the 2021 State Adaptation Strategy Update. So we will spend the bulk of our morning here together, really digging in here, very excited to be kicking this off today. Then we will take a break. We anticipate and working towards a break from 12:30 to 1:30. So I want to let everybody know we will be breaking for an hour. And then when we come back in the afternoon, we are going to have a public workshop. We're going to have 2 listening sessions focused on extreme heat. And we also have 2 speakers who are joining, our very own Jacob Alvarez from our council will be presenting, but we're going to have some local presentations around extreme heat and then dive into a workshop conversations around building out a more strategic approach on extreme heat. So as we do with all our meetings, we will take public comment for each substantive agenda item. We will also have an opportunity at the end of the meeting for public comment as well. So now the fun parts, a couple quick administrative kind of Zoom orientation notes before we dig in. So please stay muted throughout. When speaking, please keep comments concise and be respectful of our shared time together. Really appreciate everybody's participation and respect in these meetings. And note that we're on the Zoom all day today. We recognize that that is a challenge, and Zoom fatigue is definitely real. So recognize that, if you need to turn your camera off, especially for our council members during the course of the day, please feel free. We recognize people need to take breaks, step away, and come back. But as you can, and especially in conversation, we do appreciate our council members being on camera when we're in dialogue. When we are moving into the discussion portion of our agendas, we ask that everybody use the raise hand function. This way, it is kind of replicating back when we used to meet in person, the name card sequence that we used to use to be able to track comments and discussion. So please raise your hand using the raise hand feature in Zoom for both council members. And then when we move to public comment, that's also how we will call on the public. If you have questions about where to access the Zoom feature, you can reach out to Nikki Caravelli, who is here with us from OPR, or Taylor Carnavale. So if you both don't mind putting your email, or no, we don't need to put email, but just send a quick chat over to them and they can help you if you have technical issues. And then I think, yes, last thing here is that for vote, we have only, I think, one action item here for today on the approval of the minutes, but we will take the vote by roll call, just so we are sure to capture everybody's vote. I think that is it. I already said that this meeting is being recorded, but just in case anybody joined, want to let you know. So with that, I'm going to move to roll call. As I call your name, please, if you are here, let us know. I will start with Jacob Alvarez.
Present.
Carolee Brown.
Present.
Grant Davis. Okay.
Here.
Oh, great. Hi, Grant. Tina Curry. Not yet. Okay. Laura Engeman. Janet Gagnon.
Here.
Jason Greenspan.
Here.
Amanda Hansen.
Here.
David Loya.
Here.
Dan McDonald.
Here.
Sona Mona.
Present.
Darwin Musavi.
Here.
Andrea Aus.
Here.
Jonathan Parfrey. Yep. Michelle Passero. Heather Roth.
Here.
Yana Garcia.
Here.
Mark Starr.
Here.
Brian Strong. Gloria Walton.
Present.
John Wentworth.
Present.
And Wilma Wooten. All right, thank you all. So with that, we're going to move to the next item here, approval of the draft minutes from our December quarterly meeting. The meeting minutes are available on our website. If anybody would like to have access to those, they are there posted under the meeting. So with this, I'm going to open it up to the council. Does anybody have any comments or suggested or requested edits, corrections to the minutes from December? I'll give people a second. Okay, seeing none, no raised hands. Do we have a motion from anybody on the council to approve the minutes?
I motion to approve the minutes. This is Jacob.
Thank you, Jacob. And do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, John. Okay, now we'll do roll call or quick roll too for the vote. So starting at the top, Jacob Alvarez.
Aye.
Carolee Brown.
Aye.
Tina Curry. Grant Davis.
Aye.
Laura Engeman. Janet Gagnon.
Aye.
Jason Greenspan.
Aye.
Amanda Hanson,
Aye.
David Loya,
Aye.
Dan McDonald,
Aye.
Sona Monat,
Aye.
Darwin Musavi,
Aye.
Andrea Aus,
Aye.
Jonathan Parfrey. Okay, and Michelle Pissarro. Nope. Heather Rock,
Aye.
Yana Garcia,
Aye.
Mark Starr,
Aye.
Brian Strong, in case you've joined, Gloria Walton,
Aye.
John Wentworth.
Aye.
Okay, and then Wilma Wooten, I think is not here. Okay, did I miss anybody? Hopefully not. All right, thank you. So with that, we will move to the next item, which is state agency report outs. So again, oh yes.
Sorry, Lori Nazura is here in lieu of Tina Curry, so we can,
Oh,
for LOES.
wonderful. Okay, sorry. So I'm quick going back. Lori, on the minutes, we will capture your vote for approval.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Juliet. Okay, with that, we are now heading to agenda item 3, which is state agency report outs. So as we have done for the last few meetings, we are inviting our state agency partners to give quick updates, just a few minutes here so that we've got time for discussion and question from across the council, but to highlight some of the key priorities around adaptation and resilience that each of our agencies are driving on. So excited here. I am first calling on Darwin Musavi, who is joining us from Calchester.
Morning, everyone. Darwin here from the State Transportation Agency. Apologies, I'll have to be jumping off this meeting soon and can't stay today, but wanted to be here this morning to give you all an update on some of the work that we're doing at CalSTA. I primarily wanted to update you all on an item I brought up here before, which is the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure that my agency has been leading on, that we've been putting together through a collaborative interagency effort amongst other agencies. We've had about a year-long kind of public input process on it now, but we finally have a draft that is publicly available for review and feedback. And you can find that draft on the CalSTA website. There's also a email address there on the CalSTA website. So if you haven't been getting workshop updates or various announcements from us and want to be on our listserv to get those updates as we move forward, please feel free to email that address there. I think it's capti@calsta.ca.gov to receive those updates and be on our list. But real quick, just in terms of what this document is and what its role will be, the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure is CalSTA's implementation plan for the governor's executive order N1919, which was the kind of first climate change executive order that the governor put out back in September 2019. In particular, there's a therefore clause in that executive order that asks CalSTA to leverage state transportation dollars to help meet climate change goals. And so we've outlined a set of what we call our investment framework of how we would like to work within the current statutory bounds of the various state programs to maximize climate outcomes, both from a resilience and adaptation standpoint, as well as mitigating greenhouse gases as well. And so you can find that plan there, and also happy to answer any questions and do follow-ups and further outreach on that. We'll have additional workshops coming up here in April that we'd love your input and your involvement in, followed by, well, I should say not followed by, right now we're in a public comment period for that document that will close sometime in May. So that's my main update.
Great, thank you, Darwin. So we're going to go through each of these ask each of our state colleagues to give their update, and then we'll open it up for question and discussion here. So next, I'm going to turn to Lori, who's here from Cal OES.
Thank you. Not much to report. We've been 100% on COVID-19 operations and now most recently vaccine operations. But I did hire J.R. De La Rosa, known to many of you as our climate and science advisor. We're kicking off, well, we've kicked off our state emergency plan update. That's due in 2022, and JR is tasked with ensuring that the agency include and enhance all the adaptation aspects to the emergency plan. That's all I have at this moment.
Great, thank you, Lori. Next, I will go to Yana Garcia from EPA.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Happy to be here with you all. This is my first meeting. I'll start with some just quick staffing changes, since you all have probably seen my colleague Lauren Sanchez in this space. Lauren has moved on to work with the Biden administration to do international climate work with John Kerry's team. So I'm here covering for her in the interim while we're actually looking for a new climate deputy and thinking about some staffing changes associated with that. But we're very excited for her. Super good move. Just a bit of a loss for this group and for us across the state. So there's that. A couple of announcements that may or may not have been mentioned previously, so bear with me if they have been, but the Air Resources Board is going to be kicking off the scoping plan process. This is a pretty broad public process to think about how we're going to really reach our carbon neutrality targets. We have an environmental justice advisory committee that is statutorily required to help guide the inputs into this process. And there will be a solicitation for that committee in the coming months as we get ready to kind of kick off the public aspects of that process. So that's exciting. We recently at Cal EPA released an update to Cal EnviroScreen, which is a tool that I imagine many of you are familiar with. This is an environmental health screening tool that we use to administer funds, but also to focus a lot of our programmatic work, our enforcement work, et cetera. Version 4.0 of this tool, which is administered by the Office of Environmental Health Hazards Assessment, is now out for public comment. We have updated data across all now 21 indicators populating this tool, and we've included a new indicator that looks at the risk of children's exposure to lead in older housing. So that's probably the newest component of the tool. In addition, the Water Board has recently released a report in February, just last month, looking at a water rights analysis and permitting impacts given the impacts of climate change. I think my colleague Heather may have mentioned this at the last meeting. That report is now available, and I will just drop a link into the chat box in case that's of interest. But the Water Board, as many of you also are aware, are working on a lot of assessments related to our safe and affordable drinking water program and delivering safe and affordable drinking water across the state. And so really assessing the needs that we have in various regions, accounting for the impacts of climate change and what that does to our drinking water resources. Finally, we have an environmental justice small grants program that we also administer at Cal EPA. And I just want to note that we're kicking off a new application cycle on Monday. This will kick off a 3-month clock to get applications for a whole range of environmental justice related projects. I think many of you are familiar with this program, but we're really trying to focus the program in these months on resiliency and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as adaptation and emergency planning for environmental justice communities, for cumulatively burdened and vulnerable communities in our state. So exciting times ahead in looking at applications and hopefully getting awards out in the late summer, early fall. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jana, and welcome. Very excited to have you here, although we all miss Lauren, but wonderful to have you here. So thank you so much. Great. So next I'm going to go to Mark Starr from CDPH.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here and enjoying this, the report out from everybody. And it's quite a nice day up here in Northern California. So, of course, our department's extremely busy still with the pandemic, COVID pandemic. Right now, as you can tell from all the news reports, our focus is on vaccination, distribution, allocation, rollout. Very high priority for that is our equity focus. And we have, I think I mentioned last time that we have an equity metric for the pandemic as far as cases and and test positivity. So that's basically controlling the pandemic, which so far right now things are looking relatively good in California. We still have work to do, but we're getting the outbreak under some level of control. But with the vaccine rollout, we also have an equity metric for that, and we're focusing on delivering vaccine to the lowest quartile zip codes in the state at basically double the rate that we do for the other quartiles. So basically that's 40% are going to the vaccine going to the lowest quartile. We're trying to get that caught up as vaccine rolls out. It's very important because the pandemic, the case rate and the fatality rate in those lowest quartile zip codes, based on the Healthy Places Index, I should have mentioned, the least advantaged zip codes is basically account for about 40% of the cases and the fatalities. So that's the reason for targeting there. We have still about 40 to 50% of our department staff working on COVID in one way or another. So it's been a huge load on all of us. I should mention too that our climate and health equity team has a resource page that addresses climate impacts while also protecting from coronavirus. So that was developed a little while ago and has state and national guidance for protecting communities from basically co-impacts, the pandemic, extreme heat, wildfire smoke, and things like that are climate related as well. So I'll give a few updates from our climate change and health equity team, and then a couple from our department and agency in general. I'm with the Department of Public Health, but representing our Health and Human Services agency here. The first is just to let you know that we're working on the update of the climate adaptation strategy led by OPR and the Natural Resources Agency. So we work on the health equity goals and actions and metrics for that. And this is the type of thing that our staff does pretty regularly, assisting with various state strategies and plans like this. The California Climate Investment Plan and other things like that, Climate Change Investment Plan. So another area we've been working on is racial justice, while incorporating that into our work with climate change and health equity. Our department and our agency both are working to integrate racial justice into just about everything we do. It's been a priority for us. It's a priority in public health for a long time. We've had programs that are a racial health equity based, going from Black infant health program to many others. But we're really working now to further integrate and address the effects of structural racism, and the health effects of the climate crisis, of course, are exacerbated by structural racism. And addressing those, prioritizing those will not only improve the health of those communities, but everybody in a more equal society. I'm glad Jana Garcia is on with us. I just wanted to mention that we have a monthly collaboration meeting with CalPA. APA, we've done this for years. I help co-facilitate that. And I wanted to mention that a recent focus of that group is advancing an equity frame for resource allocation across our two agencies. And so relates to what I was just talking about, the importance of prioritizing economic and other resources for people and places that face the most inequities. So I want to mention that Linda Helland, who's on this meeting today, and our staff, as well as Bonnie Holmes-Jen from the Air Resources Board, are taking the first activity in this area, examining the array of tools available for identifying climate, socioeconomic, and health risks, and various adaptive capacities. So Jana mentioned CalEnviro Screen, which is new versions just out for public comment. There's the Healthy Places Index that I mentioned earlier. We have climate change and health vulnerability indicators on our website, and there's many others. So we're looking at best uses of these complementary tools, assessing the gaps, and addressing those gaps hopefully in the future. And some of this will be work will be useful with the participation of our team on the ICARP resilience metrics subgroup that you'll hear more about later. I think just a couple last announcements I guess I'll mention is that I'm now the agency representative on the Strategic Growth Council, sitting in for Secretary Mark Galley. Obviously he and his team are extremely busy with the pandemic and devoting most of their time. So I'll be participating and had my first meeting last month. Because the Strategic Growth Council has a lot to do with sustainable growth, healthy, resilient California, equity-related work, and climate change. It's an important connection, I think, for this group as well. So and relates to adaptation and resilience, because the way we grow and develop has huge effects on the severity of the climate impacts that may occur. And then just a quick announcement, you heard from Darwin Musavi about the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. We have, as a subgroup of the California's Climate Action Team, we have a subgroup called the Public Health Work Group, and that's meeting on Thursday, April 22nd, from 3 to 5 p.m. virtually, of course. And CDPH and CARB will host this work group, and our focus of that meeting will be on CalSTA's Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. So, and how that affects climate, public health, social equity goals, and things like that. So, transportation's obviously, and its options and systems are important for adaptation to climate impacts, and a part of preparing for those increasing events and improving population health. So that's an important role as well. For our very last announcement, sorry to take a little bit of time here. We have a new deputy director for our Office of Health Equity coming on board on April 12th. It's Dr. Rohan Radhakrishna. He is currently the deputy health officer at Contra Costa County Health Services, but he's done a number of interesting things in his career. Just a couple examples. He was a public health consultant with the Norwegian Refugee Council. He worked with UNICEF. He was assistant to the US ambassador at Doctors Without Borders. He worked for Ecuador's Ministry of Public Health in the past. So he's got a strong equity background, and we're really very excited to have a permanent full-time deputy director for the Office of Health Equity. And especially important given that we prioritize health equities so much for climate adaptation and resilience work. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. Always impressed by everything you all have going on, and thank you to everybody in your office for all you've done over the last year.
I'll mention also that Linda Helen put a few links to some of the things I mentioned in the chat for those that want to look at some of our tools, or the public health work group that I just mentioned is going to meet soon.
Thank you. And thank you, Linda. Yes, and there are a number of resources that, as people are mentioning them, are in the chat from across our agency partners. So next, Manda, you are up next.
Hey, everyone. Thanks, Nuantara. I will focus on sort of four key updates. The first is just, we put together a pretty significant package within the governor's proposed budget this year that would drive significantly on adaptation and resilience. Proposals that push forward to implement the water resilience portfolio, a very significant wildfire package. So we're really excited about the potential for that work to move forward. We also have been working really hard to get the our ducks in a row to get the executive order on nature-based solutions implemented. So we've got regional workshops that will be, I think save the dates are going to be going out today for us to hear from regions about how they think we should consider achieving 30 by 30, our goal to conserve 30% of California's lands and coastal waters by 2030, and to understand sort of what their priorities are as we move that along, as well as to understand from regions, how a climate smart land strategy could support their priorities, and understand any challenges or barriers that they're having to accelerating climate smart land management in their region. So really excited to get that going. I think the first regional workshop is going to be slated for April 20th, but again, save the dates will be going out today. And if you don't get them, please let me know when you're interested, or you can check out on our website. I'm happy to pass information along. Third thing is, we just released a review of state actions taken during the 2012 to 2016 drought. We're looking at some of the lessons learned through that experience very carefully right now, given what the dry year that we're having. So you can also find that on the resources website if you're interested. And then the last thing is, we'll be getting into it later today, but really working hard to partner with Nuantara and all of our interagency colleagues in building out our update to the state adaptation strategy. So that's it for me, more to come.
Wonderful, thank you, Amanda. So from OPR, I'll give a quick update and then we will open it up here for discussion among the council. A couple quick things. Obviously, the state adaptation strategy update is a major priority for us. We will talk more about that, but I do want to just thank everybody from across the state family who is on the line here today, who has really helped us think through this update and is contributing to this process. So just a big thank you to everybody for all you've done so far. A couple other priorities for us as we look to kind of this year and recent work that we've been doing. I know in our last meeting, we talked about our work to develop a vulnerable communities platform that has evolved out of ongoing work that we have done as a council over the years, but also in partnership with Greenlining and APEN, and much of the work that communities have done to really identify the need for this type of information to help better inform and guide our adaptation and resilience work. So we are making progress. We are just getting through the recruitment process to bring staff on to lead lead this important work. So we are anticipating that at our June meeting, we'll be able to bring a more substantive update, but I just wanted to give a quick note that we are continuing with that and very excited to be bringing on staff to be able to do this important work. So a quick update there. The other area where we have an update is in our climate finance work. We just recently kicked off a climate risk disclosure advisory group. So bringing together an advisory group to really help us think through and develop a series of recommendations of how we can think about a more standard approach to risk disclosure in finance and investment decisions. So that is an exciting body of work that we're just kicking off now, and really appreciative to everybody there who has contributed there and is going to be contributing time to help us think through this. And then Two other quick things, just a note that we continue to focus in on how we better bridge between our climate adaptation and resilience work to the long-term recovery needs of communities, especially communities that were so devastated by the impacts of wildfire over the last few years, including 2020. So a note that we are also going through a recruitment process, just nearing the end, to bring on staff capacity to really help us staff out our work in the long-term wildfire recovery work. That position, as well as the staff position to lead up the vulnerable communities work, is really made available through a very generous grant through the Hilton Foundation. So a thank you to them for supporting this work as well. And then the last piece that I will include in our update is just a note that OPR is leading up a just transition roadmap in partnership with the Labor and Workforce Development Agency. And this came out of executive order, the executive order that was signed this last fall, N7920. So just a note that that work is just starting to gear up to develop this just transition roadmap. We're happy to send out information from our website on that, but wanted to flag that for people. So with that, I will now open it up to any questions, comments, points from members of the council. So again, if you are on the council and want to ask a question or have a discussion here about any of the updates you've heard, please raise your hand in the under the participants area in Zoom, and we will call on you. All right, I see up first, John Wentworth. John, take it away.
Good morning. Great to see everybody virtually again, but hopefully not for too much longer. If we could talk about COVID and money, and perhaps some of the state folks could give the council an update. We're hearing locally here that all of the money coming from the American Rescue Plan, the federal government, it's coming to the state, it's coming to counties, that the state will not be building any new programs to absorb all that funding. Is it fair? Is that a fair expectation that the money will come into the state, flow through existing programs, and that the state is not going to be building a variety of different programs to work with those funds? We've been hearing this through Caltrans locally and through the state transportation folks. Thank you.
Yeah, so I can give the insight that I have, and then I will also ask any of my state colleagues who are on the line from the council. If you have additional insight, please chime in. So for the rescue plan dollars that have come in, I think it's important to recognize that those are response rescue dollars. They are not the infrastructure or long-term recovery. So if you recall back to ARA, it was both the rescue and recovery dollars as one package. This is the rescue dollars that are coming in. So a lot of that funding is going to either backfilling state funding for social safety net services and other response dollars. It's not funding towards, the large kind of infrastructure recovery expenditures. So I think it's just important to make that distinction and recognize that, at the federal level, those conversations around infrastructure and long-term recovery are still in progress. And we, will anticipate learning more over the coming months as that continues to evolve. I cannot speak definitively across all of on the rescue dollars, whether those are will or won't be any new programs. But, from what I understand, a lot of that is backfilling and providing support to ensure, the kind of the rescue portion of the funding is going out quickly. I cannot speak to how, the funding is being allocated at the local level in terms of what decisions are being made there. But that's my insight on the funding. I don't know if any of my state colleagues, Darwin, maybe you have insight you can share on the transportation side.
Sure, yeah, happy to add, since John, you specifically brought up Caltrans and CalSTA. I can speak just narrowly to the transportation component of those funds. California received through the those relief funds about a 900 million apportionment that went to our state DOT to Caltrans. That money was actually just programmed yesterday, or no, the day before yesterday, at the California Transportation Commission meeting, and through various public workshops they held, was divided with a 40-60 split for 60% state use, 40% local use, and will be essentially programmed both through locally through the STIP, and then statewide a split through the STIP and through the state highway account, which funds the shop for maintenance and operations. So essentially using existing programs to get that money out. Local agencies will have flexibility of what to do with their STIP funds. The state funds, particularly the money going into the shop, was essentially in the last round of the shop and adoption of the shop, we accounted for the need for additional revenue to meet our projections and stay on course and not have to deprogram projects. So it's very much this relief in that sense that it allows us to stay on track.
Great, thank you, Darwin. Unless anybody else from the state would like to respond, I see Heather up next. All right, Heather, we'll hand it to you.
Great. I have a question for Lori from Cal OES. There's been a lot of articles in the press about FEMA's Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant program, and the fact that that program was oversubscribed. I think FEMA set aside $500 million. I think there was like $3.6 billion in requested federal share for these grants nationwide, and over $200 million in projects from California alone. So I'm curious if Cal OES has done any assessment of how this process went, how we might do this better for this upcoming grant cycle, anything that we can do to encourage the Biden administration to fully fund the program, because they actually can potentially allocate up to $3.6 billion for the upcoming cycle for this year. And the interest is, how do we get as many of these dollars into California as possible? So interested in hearing any response from Cal OES or thoughts from other folks. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Heather. Lori, are you?
Thank you, Heather. So I am not prepared with that information. I will ask if I have Kendall on the line who can speak to that. If not, then I can take that back and get more information for this group.
Great, thank you, Lori. And this will be a quick, it will not answer your question, Heather, but just a quick connection point that when we give our programmatic update for ICARP and the work we're doing, we are looking at how we can, in partnership with FEMA and OES, really start to think about developing a pipeline of successful adaptation and resilience programs, projects specifically focused on nature-based solutions. So that doesn't answer your question, but it is also just top of mind for us in terms of how we leverage state and federal dollars to really drive towards the on-the-ground need that we see across the state in building resilience.
Thanks, Tara.
Great. So Lori, we can work with you to follow up and make sure additional information is distributed out to everybody in our notes. Jason, I see you are next.
Yes, thanks, Tara. Good morning, everybody. I have a question about the CAPTI issue that got brought up. And Darwin, it's good to see you here this morning. Southern California has a preponderance of self-help counties that have transportation investments and plans that predate AB 32. And I'm just wondering if there is a thread or some sort of guidance in the CAPTI draft document that could be a resource for those counties that could help them evaluate some of the projects that are somewhat linked to sales tax measures through the lens of climate adaptation, whether it's the timing of those projects, the design, implementation, and if that's kind of woven into the document.
And Jason, that's a great question, and something that's been front of mind for us in terms of not only setting the policy direction for where we want to go, but how do we provide the resources for folks to think about how to make those shifts and changes, given to your point that we have various commitments on the books that may not line up with where we need to go in terms of our current goals in transportation. Some of these projects have been in the pipeline for decades. We have concepts that have been floating out there sometimes since the 1950s and 60s that are still in the pipeline. I think happy to chat offline and give you a much longer answer and dig deeper, because I have a lot of different thoughts in terms of the different threads of where we can go with this. I will say we're posting just today an FAQ on our website that I think will help with some of the messaging and provide a little bit deeper perspective on like some of those hard questions in terms of how we tackle these challenges and what the document does and doesn't do, and what our expectations are in terms of CAPDI, but in terms of kind of direct assistance to locals on how to evaluate or assess their projects moving forward. There's various actions in the plan that touch on that, but happy to chat offline further and would love your ideas as well in terms of.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So I don't see any other hands or questions from council members here in the queue. I'll give people just one more minute in case there are any. Okay, seeing none, then we will open it up for public comment. Is there anybody here from the public who would like to make a comment or ask a question? Again, please use the raise hand feature if so. We'll give you a minute here. And again, if you have technical issues or can't find the raise hand button as well, feel free to send a chat over to either Juliet or Taylor from our office, and we can help as well. So, okay, well, seeing none, then we will transition now over to the next agenda item, which is an update, programmatic update from ICARP. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Juliet Hart.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. And let me put this. We just have a few updates. Some of them were touched, but first we'll turn it over to Nikki, who's going to talk about the clearinghouse and the adaptation planning guide.
Good morning, everyone. So I'll make it super quick, but I just want to report that the Adaptation Clearinghouse is alive and doing well. Since our update in the fall, we've seen a substantial increase in users on our site. Before the Adaptation Planning Guide integration update, we were averaging about 200 users a week. Now we're averaging about 350 and 450 users a week. And again, most of those users are going directly to the adaptation planning guide and particularly exploring the introductory and phase 1 portions of that part of the site. So it's really exciting to see that all of that work is being used. A couple of interesting insights about how people are accessing the site. Most of the people are Google searching it or bookmarking it, but we've seen an increase in returning users, so that's great. There are a couple of other main categories of ways people access the site, including from the OPR website, CalAdapt with the CalAdapt integrations that the CalAdapt team has been working on recently, the Office of Emergency Services, and also the NOAA Office for Coastal Management websites. Those are a couple of different portals that lead to our website, so that's great. And then a couple of really popular resources. The Coastal Plan Alignment Compass tool is still by far the most popular resource on the site, followed closely in recent months by the CAL FIRE Fire and Resource Assessment Program. So just a couple of interesting highlights there, and promising for our work in the fall when we'll be developing a wildfire plan alignment tool, sort of modeling and building off of the idea of the Compass tool, but specific to wildfire planning. A couple of our current update priorities that we're working on right now. We've been updating the featured state resources and the topic page language. We're really overhauling the equity and environmental justice page. And shout out to folks that we've been working with who have provided feedback on those pages to make sure that we're doing a good job. And then we are finalizing the touches to our Resilient CA Adaptation Planning Map, or RAP map for short, which I think I showed at a previous meeting, but this map is going to live on the clearinghouse and show what stage of adaptation planning effort different cities and counties across the state are in, and enable users to click on the polygons of the map and go directly to those plans, whether it's a local hazard mitigation plan or safety element update or whatever. And then finally, we're finalizing a demonstration video for the site search. We've seen actually a lot of people are still struggling to kind of really fully utilize the capabilities of our really wonderful complex site search. So we're doing a little how-to video, and that'll be going up pretty shortly. And then the last thing I want to report out on is that we've had a really successful round of adaptation planning guide workshops this spring. We've hosted 3 of our 5, each based on one chapter of the adaptation planning guide. And through this series, I just want to remind folks that we're really trying to focus on the stories and case studies of how communities are going about each phase of the planning process, inviting speakers from across the state, engaging a variety of different topics and speakers and diversity of geographic representation, and et cetera. And we're also really highlighting how the Adaptation Planning Guide and Clearinghouse resources can be used to meet SB 379, 1241, and 1000 requirements. And we're doing our best to demonstrate and also highlight the importance of different equitable community engagement, workshop styles, and speakers and stories throughout all of these webinars. So we've had a ton of interest and subscription to this webinar series, lots of positive feedback and engagement, averaging about 300 to 400 registrants per webinar and 150 attendees each webinar. So all in all, good stuff going on. That's all I have to say for now.
Thanks, Nikki. And then for the other work that we're doing across the council, so to Heather's question about BRIC, this is the project that Nuantara mentioned quickly. Sarah Samden from our team has been leading an effort on one of the coastal CTP Cooperative Technical Partners grants with FEMA. So this one, we've refined our scope, and we're going to focus. She's focusing more on identifying hazard mitigation projects with nature-based solutions for the BRIC program, so the Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities Grant Program. OPR is in early conversations with state partners to brainstorm potential coastal resilience, wildfire mitigation, and urban greening projects that would qualify for BRIC. So the other CTP project that we have is led by our other team member, Beth Hotchkiss. So she's been working on a database feasibility study as part of the CT grant to explore the potential need for a risk mitigation project database to hopefully inventory shovel-ready projects. So as part of this study, she's assessing user needs to better understand if this database would be of value and researching what it would take to develop and maintain such a database. In March, she sent out a survey, got about 66 responses to state, federal, and local partners. And then in the coming weeks, just yesterday, she held her first focus group to try to dig into all these questions. The other 3 items we have on the to-do list are the Prop 84 grants, which were these Prop 84 monies that hadn't been spent that we were able to turn around as planning grants for fire-affected coastal fire-affected communities. And so we have Sonoma County, Town of Paradise, and the City of Ventura, and happy to say that they are under contract and getting going, and we're having our kickoff meetings imminently, and so they're already working. So we are really excited to share updates on that. They're all sort of tackling different pieces of what is required to recover and then be resilient moving forward. The insurance subgroup, the partnership that we have with the Department of Insurance, is also going along. We have taken the feedback from the last December council meeting to update the insurance primer. The planning primer is being developed. And through that work, we're already starting to tease out what are the big questions to think about. The overall goal of this is to think about how landscape scale risk mitigation or adaptation projects could be incorporated in risk analysis by insurance companies, because at present, that's not currently how risk analysis is done. So that keeps moving along. We think at the June meeting, we'll have more on that one. This is a busy meeting already. And then the resilience metrics, which also ties into the state adaptation strategy. So I won't say too much about that here, but we've had parallel processes going between the council's work group and then also the interagency resilience work group, which is all the state agencies working in adaptation and resilience. We've been working with them to help understand why we want to measure social, built, and natural resilience, and how would we know if the state is resilient in those systems. And that all feeds into the state adaptation strategy. So just to keep us from chatting too long, I will stop there, but I'm happy to take questions.
Great. Thank you, Juliet and Nikki. Appreciate all those updates, and thank you to everybody on the team for all of the hard work everybody's doing. Are there any questions or comments from council members on any of the programmatic work we've just provided an update on? I am not seeing any raised hands. Give people a minute. All right, if there is nothing from council, are there any members of the public who would like to ask a question? Please use the raise hand feature if so, and we will add you to the queue.
You know, Tara, I think there's someone, a public member, who wants to ask a question in the chat, so might give them a second.
Perfect.
To type it in.
Okay.
Or
actually,
yeah.
Louis, I saw you clapped your hands, which also works as a wonderful way to get into the queue too. Louis, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I wondered if Juliet could just describe a little more in detail what the interagency resilience work group is, what their charge is, who's in it, kind of just enlighten us a little bit about that. I hadn't heard about it.
Sure. There's actually quite a few members of it on if you see any state folks in the participant list, most of those folks are a part of the interagency resilience work group. So it's really the agencies or offices that have really kind of, however they touch the subject of adaptation and resilience, we have them in the conversation. And so ICARP plays sort of the convening hub role for all of that. And right now, most of that work has been focused on just getting us all talking about the resilience metrics and the state adaptation strategy, but it's also a place for us to share what we're all doing, also to connect all the work that we're doing and to make sure we're aligned. And then as we move forward, they are going to play a very important role in sort of connecting down and up to make sure we're pulling in all the relevant state activities as we are developing the adaptation strategy. So it's a group that kind of morphed into this newer name, but it's still sort of the same state players that you expect to see thinking and talking about adaptation and resilience.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Great. Thank you, Louis.
Okay.
Anybody else have questions?
I don't see that question coming through, so we can just answer it if it's put in the chat.
Okay.
Wait. Okay, we'll let this person write their question in and we can answer it offline. I'll work with him to figure out how to get his question included.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you, Juliet. All right, so if nothing else there, we will move to the next agenda item, which we're all very excited to dig into here today, which is the update to the state adaptation strategy. So I think Juliet is going to pull up some additional slides. Is that right? Great. All right, so with this, very excited to be kicking off this conversation. I am going to hand it over to Amanda, who is going to kick us off here.
Thanks, Nu and Tara. And yes, I second the excitement. So really excited to walk you through the approach that we are thinking about taking for the update to the next state adaptation strategy. This is something that we update every 3 years. I'm sure all of you are aware of this, and 2021 is the year that the next update is due. So next slide. Just a little bit of background. We are required through statute to coordinate the update every 3 years, and many of the strategies that have come before focused more intently on state action, and were organized in such a way that those actions weren't, that the intersection between those actions weren't necessarily clear. And so we'd like to take a different approach for this strategy update, really trying to articulate what are California's resilience goals and how can we use this strategy as a framework for action that will facilitate regions, sectors, actors to be driving sort of in that same direction toward our goals. And we really see this as an opportunity to clearly articulate an actual strategy for building climate resilience in a way that that just hasn't been done in previous updates. Next slide. So as I mentioned, key goals are setting a strategic direction. We want to include timeframes for action. We want to use this as an opportunity to drive greater accountability. We are, the work that Juliet just mentioned around sort of developing metrics is a really important work stream that will inform the strategy. Next slide. And I think one of the really kind of fun things about this approach is really getting to pull all the pieces together. So we're not going to be reinventing the wheel and sitting down to determine, what should our strategy be for, resilience and water, that nexus. Like, no, we're going to be nesting a lot of the existing efforts where our partners all across the administration are actually doing significant work to drive on climate resilience and adaptation. And so we're going to be really utilizing the strategy as a framework for that nesting. We also, obviously, next slide. We're also going to discover, I'm sure, that there are going to be gaps. And so we want to use this strategy as a platform to start closing those gaps, to identify and start closing those gaps. And I would just say, as an example, we know that extreme heat is an issue that requires more coordinated and strategic attention, and it involves a lot of different entities across the administration. So that's a huge, that's a gap that we are really focused on using this strategy update to start closing. So we'll be talking about that more later today, but everyone's pretty focused on that as a key issue. Next slide. We kicked off stakeholder engagement in February just with a baseline survey intended to help us understand how have past versions of the strategy been helpful and where are there maybe opportunities for improvement. Taylor is going to be providing a brief presentation on what we heard. We're building out an approach to stakeholder engagement moving forward that will engage regions. Again, trying to understand sort of unique local and regional contexts. And we'll be doing sort of multiple engagement types. So, webinars, probably maybe a couple more surveys. And we're also going to be engaging in a formal tribal consultation process that I think will really yield important insights for us. And then finally, I would just say we want to engage a broad suite of stakeholders who have an important role to play with implementation. And the way that we're thinking about the engagement, sort of formal engagement that we'll be doing on the strategy is we want to understand how we can build something out that's going to be useful to implementers and policymakers across California. And so the content of the strategy, for all those things that are being nested, is not so much what we're going to be seeking stakeholder, and we're not going to be doing active stakeholder engagement on that content. We're relying on agencies who are doing a lot of that engagement, on their own. So for example, we'll be doing a lot of engagement on the nexus between lands and climate resilience through our executive order implementation process. And we'll be building that into the strategy. We're going to be focusing this bigger picture engagement on sort of the collective potential for what a framework for action, how it could be useful to people, to users. And then, next slide. The other sort of shift that we're thinking about for this update is we're going to move away from a several hundred page document to a website where people who want to understand what is California's strategy to build resilience can go and be able to understand how the pieces fit together, be able to delve into the goals and actions that we're going to be committing to take, but also to the extent that they are interested, can dig into and have immediate access to all of the work across our agencies that is being done to drive on adaptation and resilience. We will be developing sort of like a summary brochure that is printable and that people can, access, that we will have in print and that people can access if, the website is not workable for everyone. And I'm going to hand it back to Nuantara to talk about the rest of our presentation here.
Great, thank you, Amanda. So for the next slide, please, I'm going to pick up here to do a quick walkthrough of our draft priorities. We are going to come back to these and we want to have very substantive initial conversation to get initial reactions to this. But to add a little bit of detail before we get to that on what Amanda just framed out in terms of what we're driving on, as a way to move to a much more integrated approach through this state adaptation strategy, that's a mouthful, we want to identify clear priorities that integrate different sectors and perspectives and scales into clear goals or priorities as we have here, and be able to articulate then how the state, as well as our other, all the partners who are at the table and driving on action, then fit within those. So we have taken a pass at developing these 6 priority areas. Again, we're going to come back to them. We're going to have plenty of time for substantive discussion, but just to quick frame those out here. The first one is around strengthening protections for climate vulnerable communities. Definitely want to recognize and continue driving on the need that all our adaptation actions need to be reflective of the reality that climate impacts communities and people within communities differently. And that we really need to be focused on that as we're driving on adaptation and driving towards resilience. We will not be resilient if we leave people behind. The second one is recognizing just the critical role that public health and safety play in the adaptation and resilience work. And I think while COVID may not have been a climate-driven disaster or pandemic in and of itself alone, I think we have all seen and experienced within our communities and within our daily work just the significant impact that these types of events have across our communities, and really recognizing public health as an intersectional priority in our adaptation work. The other is focusing on reducing climate risks to the economy, and really recognizing that climate poses a material risk to our economy and within our investment and financial decisions. So highlighting that as a key priority as we think about building resilience in California. The next one is focused on helping nature adapt to climate change, but also accelerating nature-based solutions as a really key strategy to building resilience and adapting to the impacts of climate change. The next one is ensuring that all our decisions are based on the best available science. Investment in actionable science and research has been a cornerstone of California's leadership in climate. So really recognizing that and elevating the need to make sure we are providing resources and tools to communities and decision makers to make sure we're driving on our resilience and adaptation goals. And then the last, but definitely not least, is really recognizing that to achieve any of this, we have to leverage our resources for climate action through partnership and collaboration. And as Amanda mentioned in kind of her overview on the process, this is one reason why we really want to have these focused regional conversations, as well as conversations across different issue areas, because we know that the state alone will not be able to drive on all of this. We need to be able to leverage our partnerships more effectively to be able to drive on action. So highlighting that as a key priority to how we're thinking about driving on the state adaptation strategy. So I'm going to keep moving a little bit further, and then again, we'll come back to this, open up. We have a series of questions and want to have substantive discussion on this, but next slide, please. So Amanda talked a little bit about the structure in terms of kind of living on a website. The other piece that we wanted to, or the deliverable, the other piece we wanted to talk about here was the structure. So as I just went through, we have these draft priorities. Under each of the priorities, we want to be able to articulate how are we driving on these priorities? What are the outcomes we're working towards? And this also touches on the work we've been doing around the resilience metrics and some of the work, the update that Juliet provided in our programmatic update is we want to be able to set in this update of the strategy clear priorities. I just walked through those. And then within those, be able to articulate clear goals. Goals that are time-bound for some of them. Some we anticipate are going to be bigger, longer-term goals, but we are also trying to identify near-term goals and actions that we can take or that need to be taken to drive on these goals and in service of these priorities. So just wanted to give, this is very much an example. This is not, we haven't gotten to this level of detail in terms of drafting. We don't have a whole suite of goals and actions identified. This is part of what our public engagement process will be, is to help develop these, but just to try to put a little bit more kind of clarity in terms of what we want to drive on. This is an example here. Again, using the strengthen protections for climate vulnerable communities as one of our key priorities. As of now, the draft priorities, for example, a goal could be facilitate public and private investments that reduce risk to communities. And then the action, as an example, would be developing a tool to map climate vulnerable communities by a certain date. I use that example because it's easy, also because it's also a priority of our council and work that we're already driving on. So hopefully that just provides a little bit of additional clarity in terms of kind of the detail of what we're working towards. Next slide. So our approach, this, I do want to take just a minute here to describe kind of our process and how we're thinking about this across the administration. So for previous updates to the strategy and to safeguarding our program, ICARP, the Integrated Climate Adaptation Resiliency Program, was not around until the very tail end of the last update of safeguarding. And so given kind of the evolution of kind of statewide governance on adaptation and resilience, and given that our program exists and we have this kind of organizational infrastructure across state government, really to serve as the hub for this coordination and alignment, we are really leveraging our program to help with this and bring together this interagency coordination approach. And again, goal driving towards these integrated priorities and outcomes that we know, we're all driving on. So we're utilizing our program really as that coordination hub, working in lockstep with Amanda and her team in the Natural Resources Agency, who has the statutory charge with this for developing the strategy, but really looking to help bring these pieces together so that our strategy is understood and we can really accelerate strategic implementation, which is one of our kind of statutory directives through our program. So next slide. So quick here on timeline, we have a very ambitious timeline, also recognizing there is a lot going on this year, as you heard just a few quick examples and updates from our state colleagues as well. So we've really spent the first quarter of this year launching an interagency coordination process, again, leveraging the interagency resilience work group that Juliet mentioned for a kind of internal coordination, alignment, discussion, but also kicking off our stakeholder engagement process, both the survey, which I'm gonna hand it to Taylor in a second to give a quick readout on what we heard, but then also, starting with this conversation and heading into the next quarter, really mapping out our stakeholder engagement process. So in the second quarter, again, stakeholder engagement, there will be many opportunities for discussion and conversation, opportunities to weigh in and help us draft this strategy. And then in the third quarter, we will be doing a formal, it's not on the slide here, but we will have a formal public comment period to provide input on the strategy once it is drafted. And then we are working to launch the strategy itself on that website at the end of quarter 3. So again, very ambitious timeline, especially in context of everything else that's going on, but this is what we are driving towards. Next slide. I think next one is just our contact information in case you have questions. So with that, I am going to see if there are any clarifying questions about what we went through in terms of the process and kind of big picture. I am going to ask people to hold substantive feedback on the priorities or kind of this approach, because I do want to give Taylor an opportunity to give a quick readout on what we heard from that first baseline survey and then transition into discussion, just because it'll help paint a little bit more context on some of the feedback we heard about the value and of previous state strategies and then opportunities for improvement. So again, clarifying, I want to take a minute here though, in case there are clarifying questions here. And Heather, I see a note that you just put in the chat. The goals aren't set yet, but will be defined through engagement over the next quarter. That is exactly right. What we want to do here today is start a conversation around what the priorities are and giving people something to respond to. But yes, these are absolutely not set, and that's what we want to discuss here in a little bit. So thank you for that clarifying question. There are a couple other comments here in the chat as well. So we will make sure that we touch on these in the discussion. So I'm not seeing any hands for clarifying questions.
No, I'm not either. And the chats that are, or the comments that are from the council members are more deep discussion questions, which we'll have. And then there are a couple of clarifying questions from the public. So I don't know if you want to take those at this point or.
Yes, if you can help orient me to any of those clarifying questions, that would be great.
Just give one more second for the council, but it doesn't look like there's anything from the council. So we have one question. How do you plan to hold agencies accountable to their plans?
Okay, yes, actually, thank you very much for that question. Forgot to mention it in one of my slides. So in addition, the statutory directive is that the strategy needs to be updated every 3 years, as Amanda mentioned, and also that also includes in the statute annual updates to the legislature. So we are right now, we don't have kind of exactly what that looks like, but we're working to, through this process and through the update, make sure that we're setting up a structure that will allow for kind of in annual intervals, clear updates on how we are making progress towards advancing these priorities. That is one of the reasons why we also want to set clear goals and actions so that we can keep a clear track of like how we are doing, and also identify where there are resource needs to be able to continue driving on these priorities. So thank you for that question.
Thanks. And then there was one more question about, I think maybe a misunderstanding of what the strategy is, because of the question around grants. So the question is, what will be the dollar ranges for the grants? What time frame? So perhaps we can clarify that this is not, let you take it.
Yeah, and Amanda, if you want to take this one in terms of kind of what the strategy is or isn't, please chime in. Otherwise, I can.
Sure. I mean, the strategy is really intended to drive how we invest in climate resilience and how we want to move this, move the needle on this. So there's no specific, grants that are going to be part of the strategy. More like the strategy is should be really informing all of our grants once it is released. So, and then the time frame, well, I think you're asking more about specific grants, but this document is intentionally updated because the situation evolves. So it's updated every 3 years. And so I assume that, as our strategy evolves, so will the implications for the variety of our grant programs.
Great, thank you. Okay, Juliet, any other clarifying questions before we hand it to Taylor, and then we'll open it up for broader discussion?
No, I don't think there are any. I think we're.
Then Taylor, I'm going to hand it to you to walk through the feedback we got on our initial survey.
Good morning, all. As mentioned, we kicked off our 2021 State Adaptation Survey update with a survey that solicited input on both the value of previous iterations of the strategy as well as opportunities for improvement. We received a lot of valuable takeaways from the survey, but first, I think it's really important to recognize who our respondents were. So we received representation from all 10 of California's regions defined by the Adaptation Clearinghouse. The largest regional representation was from the Sacramento Valley, and the least represented were the Inland North and Desert regions. In terms of respondent affiliations, the most prominent amongst respondents were individual as well as state and local government practitioners. The first question of the survey pertained to the usefulness of the adaptation strategies in the past. So as you can see from the pie chart in this slide, we received like almost half of respondents saying the strategy was useful. And then looking at that second half, we had 28% of respondents marking as being unaware of the state adaptation strategy, and 16% marked not useful. And much of the commentary surrounding the not useful designation surrounded the strategy being too high level and vague for rural areas. Next slide, please. Oh, and then the second question as well asked respondents where there had been gaps in past iterations of the survey. And in analyzing responses to this question, kind of 4 main themes stood out in frequency. So the first was insufficient consideration for specific subject areas. So this ranged a large degree, but we took note of kind of those topic areas and where there seemed to be major themes there. A need for actionable goals, which is also being touched upon in the chat today, and we're hoping to take on through the integrated approach. And then a lack of resources for jurisdictions to implement the strategy and a need to measure progress. I think it's really interesting to note how these gaps are being addressed currently through our approach to the 2021 strategy, especially through the resilience metrics piece and the integrated approach. Next slide, please. The third question, what are key climate resilience priorities and how can the state adaptation strategy best support them, solicited a wealth of feedback. And looking at these responses and their alignment with our draft priorities, there's almost equal distribution across the priorities, as you can see in kind of the pie chart on this slide. But also, it's interesting to see where there was kind of alignment in terms of identifying gaps in past strategies and where respondents also saw means to improve and what should be prioritized in the 2021 strategy. So those kind of themes that we saw big kind of frequency in through both the second and third question were the alignment of adaptation efforts across state, regional, and local, and also measuring progress through metrics. So that being said, the strategy, the survey has been summarized and all those findings have been included in a one-pager that is both item 5 of our meeting materials online, but has also been linked in the chat. If anyone has any further questions, I can also answer all of those in the chat. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Taylor, for summarizing that. And, I just want to thank everybody who, if anybody on this line on our meeting here provided input. It was really very valuable for us to get this initial feedback in terms of where there were gaps in previous strategies and what the needs are so that we can bring that into the fold as we're updating the strategy this go around. So really appreciate everybody taking the time to give us their very thoughtful feedback on that survey. So much appreciated. And thank you, Taylor, for that very helpful response. Yes, and so if people do want to take a look at the additional through this conversation too, look at the additional detail in that summary document that was linked in the chat. We're also happy when we transition to discussion to also talk about any questions that you have or observations from the survey as well. So Juliet, I think now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we will go open it up for discussion. So returning, and we're going to keep these priorities up, but we can move around to any of the slides that we've covered if you want. So please, if you want us to transition over to a different slide, just let us know. But wanted to pull these priorities up. A couple key questions we would love to get the council's input on here as we tee up this discussion here. The first question is on these priorities. Do you see your work reflected? Are there major gaps that we've missed that need to be addressed and brought in? Another question we would love to get people's thoughts on as we go through this discussion is, recognizing, as we've mentioned, both Amanda and I in our discussion, then that, the state alone is not going to be able to drive on these priorities. We need partnership, we need alignment. So, how do we work in partnership together across the state to really be driving on these priorities? And then, just a quick, again, connection point here around the importance of the metrics conversation that we are having, and a quick note that just to make clear that that conversation around how we track our progress over time and the metrics work is obviously very, going to feed into this strategy. And ultimately what we want to do is be able to have clear metrics for each of the priority areas that we land on. So just want to highlight the importance of that work and thank our council for your dedicated effort over the months to help us think through this very complex question of how we actually track our progress over time. So I'm sure there are many other questions that you all have for us, and we can open it up for conversation. So I am looking at my list here in terms of council member questions that are in the queue. I have Michelle, and then Mark, and then John Wentworth. We'll continue to keep this updated. So Michelle, I'm going to hand it to you to kick this off for discussion.
Great, thank you so much. And I really appreciate your hard work and the presentation. I think it's really important that somewhere we articulate, and maybe it's in the form of priority or principles as we pursue this, that where we can we need to be integrating mitigation with these strategies. One, we don't want to make the issue worse, and we try making our challenges with adaptation and resilience worse. There are a lot of opportunities, right, to help kind of address climate change writ large. And, you know, terminology can get in the way too, where some of resilience, I think of climate mitigation as part of a resilience strategy. And so sometimes I think we can get siloed with the terminology. And so and really just making best efforts and to show where possible where these things can be integrated, both in terms of planning, but also when we think about specific actions, activities, or projects, where we're able to do that, both to avoid harm, but ideally to help us be, over the long term, be even more resilient and be able to address climate change.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Very appreciate that. I think I am always reminded that the I in our program name for integrated references that explicitly of like driving towards integrated approaches on climate that are both adaptation and mitigation. And yeah, from our perspective, resilience does include that, recognizing, you know, there are opportunities for co-benefits. There are also sometimes trade-offs. So really appreciate that. Amanda, if you have anything that you would want to add to that, please weigh in. Otherwise, we'll keep moving. Okay, so next up is Mark Starr, I believe.
Yeah, thank you, Nuantara. Just before I make my comment, I just want to echo the comment we just heard from Michelle. You know, in our world in public health, we look a lot for overlaps and, you know, mitigation with health co-benefits, but I think the same idea applies here, that resistance and adaptation strategies can also have, you know, mitigation co-benefits, if you will. And we really do want to have that integrated approach. And there's lots of things that elevate resilience and adaptation and also have impacts on mitigation. So the comment I had in the chat was really about strategy number 2 here. And you know, we could try and help on some wording, I think, but I was just thinking it could be a little bit broader than, you know, protecting public health and safety, especially in the event of climate disasters that really could be ongoing. I mean, we're living in climate change now, and we're not, you know, just focusing on public health and safety when there's a fire or a flood or whatever. So I suggested something like protect and advance public health and safety in the context of climate change, and added the word advance as well as along with protect. And again, this kind of goes with co-benefits, and a lot of what we're doing can advance health and reduce chronic diseases while we're at it. So that was kind of the idea there.
That's great. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. So next up, I have John Wentworth. And then after John, just to queue up, is Jana.
Thank you very much. I will be succinct. I see the work that I'm doing reflected in these priorities. I'm very grateful for that, but I see my work in here. I think that there's a couple opportunities that we've got here. One is that we could use the TAC to start doing some work across the priorities, to really start looking at how we can connect the dots, given all the different disciplines that we represent, and start connecting the dots across the priorities so we can, out of the box, not be working in silos. We can break that down. We can start working across the various priorities from our various perspectives, so we can create alignments. We can work across jurisdictions. I think that would be a very valuable exercise that we could work on. I want to highlight, and I'll put some of these things in the chat, the slide that had the approach slide. It was a very beautiful slide. That was a picture taken in Yosemite National Park. That is part of our federal landscape, which is about half of the state of California. The state of California has signed a shared stewardship agreement with the U.S. Forest Service that the governor signed a couple of months ago. We need to be bringing, and I would like to get some clarification at some point about the role of the federal landscape in this program. We can save that for later, but that shared stewardship agreement is a key policy framework that we should all be looking on to work with. I've got a couple other documents that we've been working on. I'll just put in the chat, but I think this is really, really good. And I think that if we really leverage what we've got in the TAC and why the TAC exists to start doing that cross-pollinating, I think that's going to be a key way to take advantage of this assembled group. And I'll put a couple of things in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. And I appreciate your offer to help us think through right out the gate how we, and actually modeling this integrated approach. So we will definitely be following up with you and would love to get your thoughts on how we do that right out the gate. So
yeah, just be careful what you wish for, but yeah. Thank you.
So thank you. Yes, you are now employed. Thank you to help us. Okay, so next is Jana, and then let me check my notes here. After Jana will be Heather.
Hi, everyone. So anyway, this is great work, and I will echo some of the comments that have been made earlier, that we really, language matters. And I think integration is more of a vague term than greenhouse gas reductions or mitigation. We still have local governments, tribal governments who are still getting their arms around thinking through the climate crisis lens. We've also seen dramatic acceleration of the conditions, the hazardous conditions that our climate crisis is creating for us all. And the more explicit we can be about pairing adaptation with mitigation in every instance, the better. And as I put in the chat, what we're hopeful for is that by using that language, it's going to drive some of these analysis tools that we need, the carbon life cycle analysis tools that go, back further, but were articulated initially for the work in this group with Executive Order B3015. We still don't have, sort of accessible, easy to use tools for smaller, under-resourced governments to conduct analysis on the carbon footprint of projects so that they can make good climate smart decisions that are also cost effective, both immediately and over the long term. So I think that's work that the TAC could incorporate into some of the foundations we've already begun to put together. But those kinds of tools will really work to accelerate our progress towards these goals. But it starts with, the orientation around pairing mitigation and adaptation together in every instance. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenna. Okay, next we have Heather.
Thanks, Nu and Tara. I'm really glad to see all of this work, and I'm very glad to see how Amanda sort of laid this out by noting that we want to be very specific. We want to have, timeliness in it. And what I'm hearing is, an approach that will be based on SMART goals, right, that are specific and measurable and attainable and relevant. And so in that spirit, I'm hearing a little bit of conflation between priorities, goals, and principles. And so I think that's something at the outset we need to hash out, right? And we look at this priorities slide, right? A priority is strengthening protections for our communities. And I think a principle is using, the best available climate science throughout that priority. And if you go to the structure, right? I just really encourage us to be very specific and very timely for, if we go to the structure slide, it said, for example, a priority is strengthen protections and our goal is facilitate investments. Well, we need to have a specific, like a number, right? How many, how much in investments, and is there a certain type of quality of investments, right? And if, and when do we want to get this investment? I'll just make it up. Do we want $50 million in public-private partnerships by the end of the year, right? let's see if we can meet that. If we can't meet that, then, that helps us next year when we rethink and update to, okay, if we couldn't meet that, what is preventing us? Or if we met it, like, let's expand it further. So really looking forward to working with all of you on working through these questions, because they're not easy. But I'm glad to see this work, and just, again, let's just be very clear and very precise about what we're trying to get to.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate that, and 100% concur. And really looking forward to getting help and thoughtful insight in how to do that. So let's see. Next is Jason, and then I have Kara Lee, and then I will we'll go from there.
Thanks, Nuantara. I want to agree with John. I see the work that my agency is doing reflected here in the priorities. And I wanted to also mention on priority, well, the second one listed here, not priority number 2, what Mark was saying about the issue on public health. What I kind of seized on here was the notion of climate disasters. And I think that's important to reference, but I also think that we want to not only emphasize kind of disruptive events, but also acknowledge the ongoing stressors that are associated with, heat and impacts on public health. So I wouldn't want that to get lost in the priorities here, that we're not just responding to like a one-off disaster here and there. There are ongoing stressors that we need to adapt to. The other one, and I think this is just a tough one, and I definitely don't want to get into wordsmithing now, but the help nature adapt to climate change. Maybe this is just my connotation, but whenever we've tried to help before, it hasn't gone very well. So maybe it's just a word choice, maybe supporting nature or just something. I want to avoid the maladaptive notion here. And I think that the second part of the sentence gets to that, accelerating nature-based solutions. That's great. But there was just something that hit me about the first part of that priority that didn't feel right. I would like to focus more on the nature-based solution part rather than, where government would help.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. I'm going to look to Amanda just to make sure, in case you have any follow-up or questions or points you want to make. Anything?
No, I think all of these suggestions make a lot of sense. This is why we're here. The thing I do want to just quickly comment on is I'm seeing some suggestions in the chat around sort of GIS tools, and I will just point to some work that we're doing in our effort to build out an approach to 30 by 30 and the Natural Working Lands Climate Smart strategy, where we are working with Esri to build out a tool that should identify, areas of opportunity to either, undertake conservation or some other climate smart land management in such a way that can also protect biodiversity, increase equity. And so that's work that is ongoing and taking place through the process that I mentioned in my earlier remarks. And I think, we will be utilizing, my sense anyway, nothing is sort of finalized, but our initial thinking is that we would incorporate the downscaled climate projections from the 4th climate assessment and then update as they are updated, but use those as sort of a way that users can see how climate change is expected to impact their region between now and the end of the century. So I'm hopeful that that tool can be supportive of some of what is being raised in the chat, although I'll be honest, I haven't read the chat super specifically, so maybe they won't, but I did just want to throw that out there.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, next, Kara Lee. And then I have Sona and Gloria.
Perfect. No, thank you so much. And yes, I do see that my work is reflected in these priorities. We're currently running several actually community-based outreach efforts around both climate action plans and climate resilience plans in one city, unfortunately, separately. But I do want to kind of echo Mark's comment in expanding that second one, because what we're finding is resilience and adaptation strategies are really that opportunity to engage vulnerable communities and disadvantaged communities. Some of those strategies are the ones that they understand that will affect their daily lives now, particularly in the way they are experiencing health and safety issues. And so I just want to expand that to be not just in the event of climate disasters. It's a daily thought and daily experience that they're having. And so I do also understand, that it's the way to connect mitigation and resilience together, I think, as so many other people have said. So I just kind of don't want to miss that opportunity here. And I think, that will help engage folks. And then also reduce climate risks to California's economy. Again, I think some of those experiences, particularly the health ones, are affecting our economies on a daily basis as well. So I know I'm just kind of spewing here, but we're trying to rationalize how this is, affecting our vulnerable communities, and what the opportunity here is, not only to engage them, but also to address those health and safety concerns that they're most passionate about. So just kind of want to throw that out there, and I have to think more about it, but I just didn't want to lose that point that both Mark and Jason did also make.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Sona, I'll hand it to you.
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate the just all of this context and information. Super exciting work happening. I just had 3 comments to make. One, really appreciate the prioritization of strengthening protections for climate vulnerable communities, and would love to see, I think, like in the last plan, that the equity and environmental justice concerns and considerations are showing up throughout the entire strategy, not just in one chapter, but we're really de-siloing and showing how all of these different sectors might be able to mitigate some of the climate risks that vulnerable populations are experiencing. And then second, as we're discussing vulnerable populations and thinking about equity and environmental justice, I would really encourage adding some context about why these communities are vulnerable in the first place, and really getting to how structural and institutional racism has led to these climate inequities that we're seeing today. I think I've seen a lot of studies recently about how previously redline communities are ones that are experiencing disproportionate exposure to flooding, sea level rise, extreme heat, and other climate threats. And so I'd love to see this strategy and the state as a whole really connect the past with the present and create opportunities so that we're thinking about how these strategies can reduce short-term vulnerabilities, but also constantly keeping in mind how can these strategies in the long term sort of get to these root causes that we're seeing. And then lastly, I am curious if there is an overlap with the timeline of the vulnerable populations mapping tool and this work, and even if they're not going to happen exactly at the same time, if there's a way for the mapping platform work to inform this strategy so that we can have some specificity about who are these vulnerable communities that we're talking about.
Thank you, Sona. Appreciate all of that. Just a quick to respond to the last point you made, that specific question on timeline. We do not have a specific timeline yet for the vulnerable communities platform. Just as we're, once we get our staffing on board, we'll be able to really accelerate that and pull together a timeline. So I can't give specifics, but it is our intent wherever we can to make sure that the processes, both for development of that platform and the development of the strategy, are connected where we can. We also want to make sure, just to circle to Amanda's last point around development of the platform that's supporting the executive order implementation, we also want to make sure those things are talking to each other, and we're not creating in our effort to bring things together, we're not creating a whole bunch of different tools and frameworks that aren't talking to each other. So my hope, also, last thing I'll say on this, is that that conversation around what are the underlying existing inequities and structural systems that are driving, inequities within communities, that conversation, as we're having that through the development of the platform, will also feed into this and help us understand the important priorities, the right language, and all of that. So I'm sorry, I can't give a more specifics on the timeline, but just know that it is our goal and intent to make sure that these conversations are linked and feeding into one another. So I'm very excited to be able to share more detail on the specifics coming up soon. Okay, so now, Gloria, I will hand it to you.
Thanks so much, Nuantara, and the team just for working on this lead thinking to get our kind of brain power going, and really appreciating everyone's contributions thus far, and definitely wanting to underscore what Sona raised and Mark and Jason, and kind of build on it and add to it. Okay, so in looking at the priorities, I do agree and really appreciate like the language that Mark suggested around just advancing and protecting public health and safety in the context of climate change. So trying to make it more broader, and just wanting to offer that we can also have some language around proactive frames, because I think right now we're very situated in the problem, which is definitely important. And I think there's opportunity to have proactive frames that are not just rooted in the problem, but also advancing solutions, for example. And maybe some language around the democratization of climate solutions and advancements, particularly thinking about localized energy mitigation, adaptation, and resilience solutions. And that can be a way to kind of reinforce doing this stuff in partnership with local communities, because a lot of our communities are holding a lot of these solutions already. And so there's an opportunity to elevate and uplift some of that. And then just wanting to also underscore just, something that triggered me too with the language of helping nature, and particularly those two words. So, and I can try to think more about a different type of frame too, to kind of disrupt, the helping nature part. That I don't know if that's what we would really be doing, or if nature's helping us and we just kind of have to, figure out like the flow of nature and natural processes. And I can't remember who mentioned it, but also just wanting to underscore just like the cross-pollination and appreciating the contributions there. So any way to be helpful, Nuantara and team, I'm here, and but definitely wanting to see if we can add language around solutions and a proactive frame and stance.
Wonderful. Thank you. That is, all very insightful, and appreciate all of that. I definitely think we want to drive on solutions. So I really appreciate that frame, and is really helpful as we think about this kind of the evolution of these priorities. I want to do a quick looking at the chat here too, and some of the comments that have come in, and there is one from Rico. And John, I saw you also kind of voted up in terms of priority as well. I do want to, I think, this point of, really understanding what's the scale of investment needed to be able to drive on these priorities is a huge question, and focus also. And, I think from our perspective, from the beginning of this administration, have really tried to take an all of government approach on driving on these integrated challenges that, climate presents, both in terms of reducing emissions, addressing adaptation, and building broader resilience. And we can't keep thinking about, we can't think about that as, oh, there's one pot of funds that's going to drive on all of this. We really need to think about how do we just integrate these considerations into the investment decisions we're making every day. And the state, as a steward of public dollars and investments, we need to be doing that. So I just want to say that is really the point I think that was raised here in Rico's chat is central to our approach in terms of how we're thinking about integrating climate into our investment decisions. And I think, unpacking it a little bit for this, recognizing there's just, 5 or 6 words here for this third priority, but, actually how we do that is going to be a really important thing for us to focus on. So just want to give a quick response to that. Okay. Juliet, can you advise if there are other council members who are in the queue that I am missing?
No, just to note that Jana put a story map in the queue there, and I don't know if she wants to speak to what it is.
Sure, thanks. I did just drop that in just from where I'm sitting right now. Really, really great work, Nuantara and Amanda. Really interesting to see kind of where we are. And Sona mentioned, really taking stock of some of the ongoing structural ways in which racism persists and leaves many communities particularly vulnerable to climate change, et cetera. And that's part of the underlying concept around the Vulnerable Communities Mapping Platform. But just wanted to put in an example of something that came out of Cali, PA earlier in February, which is the result of some of the racial equity work that I think several of our agencies are involved in, including many of us here, but really looking at the persistence of disparities caused by the practice of redlining and how that intersects directly with environmental burdens and health vulnerability. So just an example of how we can kind of pull those types of analyses together. Thank you for that, Juliet.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jana. Really appreciate that. Juliet, any other comments that I have missed in the chat?
Not from council. Yeah, there are more comments, but they're from public. So, but I do not see any. I see John upvoting lots of stuff, but we've addressed that, and so. But otherwise, I don't see any other council members' comments.
Okay, so maybe we will open this up to the public to weigh in and provide feedback and comment. I know there are some things here in the chat, so we'll continue to monitor those and address those as we see specific questions come in. But anybody from the public who would like to offer comment, feedback, suggestions, please do raise your hand in the chat feature or use the clap function, the emojis, however works for you to get us, let us know you want to be in the queue.
And I think for some people, they're not seeing either of those. So if you just write next, yes, in the chat, we'll know that you want to speak.
Great. While we're letting people either find the hand raise or get your comments in, I'm just looking through here. Okay, Craig, yes. I see your question. Would you like, I can read this off and respond, or would you like to unmute and ask your question? Okay, read and respond. Perfect. Okay, so Craig's question here is our agency going to have funds to pay private ecological restoration consultants to help form these plans or try to put all of these plans together in-house? Yes, so I will maybe take a first pass at this, and then Amanda, also please weigh in if you want. So just to go back to kind of the overarching charge of and role of the strategy, it is not a funding plan, and there won't be a discrete kind of individual pot of funding that will go towards implementing. The intent is that this is the administration's overall strategy that outlines what are our priorities, how is the state taking action to drive on building, adapting to the impacts and building resilience across the state. So no, there won't be any specific set of funding that, is tied to this, say, a specific grant program per se. But going back to Amanda's point from earlier in the discussion, what we do want to do is make sure that once we have this kind of strategic framework built out, that state investments are driving on those priorities. So across state agencies, departments, boards, where we have grant programs, where we are spending state dollars, we want to make sure where it makes sense, those activities and investments are driving on the strategy that's articulated here. So I hope that that answers your question. Feel free to either unmute or send in an additional question if that didn't clarify. And then Amanda, if you have anything else you would want to add in, please do.
I think you covered it.
Okay, great. Okay, James, is it James Waterman? Please excuse me if I mispronounce anybody's names, but James.
Yes, hey there. It's so fascinating to listen in to all the work you're doing. It's so important. I work for a vendor and I'm here representing a vendor, and I just can't resist the need to say that I work for a company, SaaS, that has the ability to bring all of your data together and give your data scientists a platform to draw the correlations between all your work and begin to, through machine learning and our modeled operations, see where everything connects and where it's going. And I would absolutely love to bring some of our data scientists to just show you how all of this can be tied together. And I recognize this may be the wrong venue for saying it. And if it is, I'll keep listening and learning, but I'll stop talking. But we at SAS, we can do what I'm hearing you talking about, we can do. And I would love an opportunity to bring our data scientists to show you how we can bring your work to life and connect it. Sincerely, I believe that.
Great, thank you, James. And yes, happy to have a kind of follow up directly on details on that. I think, as we've mentioned, there are a number of different efforts going on across the state in terms of really trying to bring our data and information together. So appreciate that. Yes. And we can follow up.
Thank you so much.
Great. Craig, I see you had a follow up. So would you, I'm not sure, you're happy to have you unmute, or I can just read it again. Maybe while I will start. So you responded, yes, professionals in the field might bring some real life examples that could be included in the plans. So absolutely. And I think that is one of the things as we framed out earlier, but just to return to, because I think it's really important, is that we recognize that taking this integrated approach, having these integrated priorities means we have to identify the solutions and expertise that everybody brings to bear to drive on these. And so definitely recognizing there are experts and professionals in the fields across, public, private, nonprofit sectors that are all going to need to contribute to this. So definitely want to make sure we're bringing that knowledge and expertise into this as we go. So if there are additional kind of detailed opportunities that you think we should be aware of, please feel free to reach out and we can connect with you as a follow-on from this conversation. So thank you. Okay, I see Warner, you have your hand up, and then there is a question from Nancy Thomas in the thread. So Warner, will go to you, and then I will, Nancy, go to your question.
Am I unmuted?
Yes,
hello?
You are.
Okay. You mentioned two things about sort of GIS mapping. One, at least I thought it was two. I'm sorry, Warner Chabot, I'm the executive director of the San Francisco Estuary Institute. And you talked about GIS mapping, working with ESRI to try to sort of map, I think, priority areas or areas for focus on adaptation issues. And I thought another aspect of GIS mapping about identifying disadvantaged frontline communities, I believe. Can you just elaborate shortly, sort of your time frame? Is it your intention and goal to kind of complete that mapping or do that mapping and incorporate it into the plan that you produce by early summer, or is that just a tool that you want to create for long-term effect, or both?
I will respond from my from kind of OPR perspective in the work we're working on the vulnerable communities platform piece, and then I will hand it to Amanda to talk about the other platform in support of the executive order. So Warner, generally, I would say from your description, it's the latter, thinking about these as really important tools to help us make sure we're making the right decisions and have the right information to do that. So I'm not seeing on the side of the development of the vulnerable communities platform, we're not building it just to inform the strategy. We want to build an integrated tool that brings existing data sets, existing information together to really help people, practitioners, both state, regional, local, across the scale, across the state, have that information in their decision making. So I would say it's the latter. It's a tool that we want to be able to use to implement the strategy and what comes through. So I will hand it to Amanda to frame out or respond from her perspective.
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Warner. The tool that we are, or the system that we're building out as part of our implementation of the nature-based solutions executive order is intended to be a place where conservation decisions can be informed. And I think through the development of this tool, where we are hoping to be able to sort of identify opportunities, conservation opportunities, or just broader land management opportunities that can address climate, biodiversity, and equity. That tool, I mean, we really wish that we could incorporate Nuantara's work into CA Nature, because we want to be able to sort of show, where are landscapes with significant greenhouse gas benefit, where are landscapes where investing in resilience in those landscapes can protect vulnerable communities or vulnerable places. So, as Nuantara mentioned, our goal is to have, our teams working very closely together in the data that gets put into CA Nature to identify vulnerable people and places, but it will just be sort of step one in the process, and it will feed in, once the vulnerable communities platform is completed, it would get reflected in CA Nature, which, CA Nature is going to be rolled out in the fall, I think, for sort of input and feedback, and then likely completed right around the time that we would be releasing our 30 by 30 pathways document, which is scheduled for February of next year. I hope that answered your question. If it didn't, please follow up, okay?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, going to Nancy Thomas's question here, and Nancy Thomas is at UC Berkeley with the Geospatial Innovation Facility. Nancy asked, how is the planned vulnerable communities mapping platform tool related to existing climate state resources like caladapt.org? So great question, Nancy. Thank you so much. So the intent with the platform is to be a place where we integrate existing data from various different sources, including CalAdapt, which we absolutely will point to as the source for the state's downscaled climate projection and risk data. And that the platform, the Vulnerable Communities platform, really, we're not looking to recreate another standalone, I think, the platform or tool out there. What we want to do is bring this information together so that people, decision makers, communities have the information in one place and don't have to go to a million different sites to try to access it, and understand what are the underlying factors that are driving vulnerability to different risks within different climate risks within different communities. So definitely looking to bring in the information from CalAdapt into that platform, but also there are many other tools like the Healthy Places Index, there's the Regional Opportunity Index. There are a number of other existing data sets across the state as well. So this is going to be a big effort to really integrate all of this data into one place. So I hope that answers your question. Nancy, feel free to add another note if I missed something or you have clarifications. Okay, so I'm seeing the chat here. Does anybody, maybe before I go back to the chat, we'll just go back and forth. Anybody here want to ask a question here out loud? Raise your hand. Okay. So I am seeing, let's see. So Craig has another question. Please read and answer. I do not detect either any carrot or sticks for this plan. Usually you need some kind of economic incentives for people to adopt something new. Is something like that going to be built into this plan in the future? So we are definitely going to be looking at, across these, what is it going to take to actually implement and drive on these priorities? Again, I think this is, really our intent is not to, so if you look at previous iterations of the strategy, safeguarding, it included a long list of state actions. So some of those were funded, some of them were projects, some of them were individual policies. Oop, we're getting some, I think, background noise. If everybody can mute, that would be appreciated. And some of those, some of those actions that were included in safeguarding were both kind of regulatory actions, some were financial. So incentives, or in your language here, carrots. So I think, what we want to do is pull together at a higher level, what are the priorities we're driving at, so that people within their agencies, departments, actors can understand what are the right incentives to drive on these priorities. So I hope that answers. Again, really happy to have additional follow-on conversation with you about the details here. Definitely agree. We need to make sure we're aligning both kind of the regulatory structures as well as incentives to drive on these complex outcomes. So let's see, I have another note here. So Heather, I see you have your hand up. I will open it up to you.
Yeah, just in response to your answer to Nancy, as someone who uses CalAdapt and has other maps and other indicators that we're using, have we considered taking the output from the vulnerability work and integrating that into CalAdapt? Because it just seems like we don't need more places for people to go. Like we have like a one-stop shop, so that instead of you guys pulling data from CalAdapt, why don't you pull your data, or why don't you have CalAdapt pull your data? And if that's not a possibility, like how can we make it better so that that is an option?
Yeah, I think, Heather, that's a great question. And I think definitely on the table as we, explore many different options, there are, as I mentioned, there are a number of existing tools and platforms that do a piece of what we want to pull together. So I think one of the early steps for us is building on the work that we've done previously to identify some statewide tools and data sets, but also the work that APEN did in their mapping resilience report that really is a very well organized and well inventoried list of tools. That is going to be one of the questions is, how do we bring these things together so we're not just creating another tool? I think my point is, though, we're not going to be pulling from other data sets for the future climate projection and risk. There will be alignment with the state's investment in the data that are in CalAdapt. So I hope that answers. And yes, lots to figure out in terms of the right home and the right way to do this. So we're not just creating another tool. John, I see John Wentworth has his hand.
Yeah, just to follow up on that a little bit. I think we talked about that maybe one of the metrics meetings, but to keep policy and data mapping all these different things in their appropriate lanes. There's real risks of these tools overwhelming the ability to set policy policy to describe actions, to get things done. And I think it's just critically important that we keep everything in the right place. Otherwise, we could get overwhelmed and swamped real quick.
Great, thank you, John. Okay, there is a note in the chat from Kim. So locally, we're finding that sequestration is likely the only way to balance remaining emissions after all possible generation emissions are addressed to achieve carbon neutrality. How will sequestration be integrated into the resilience work? Amanda, I may ask if you don't mind taking an answer to this one.
Yeah, great question. I mean, fundamentally, the work that California does, the sort of strategic plan for our emissions reduction is the scoping plan. But as has come up multiple times, there's so many different, particularly in the world that I happen to work in right now, so many different nature-based solutions or climate solutions that can support sort of both goals, both drive, achieving carbon neutrality and building climate resilience. And so wherever that nexus exists, I would want to make sure are reflected in the strategy. I think it's as others have discussed previously, and I think California has made pretty clear, we generally prioritize those actions that can do both things. So we want to continue with that sort of philosophy moving forward. So I feel that there's a lot of alignment amongst all the people who have spoken on to this particular issue this morning.
Great, thank you, Amanda. Okay. I'm checking here. So I have a comment in the chat from Lewis, and then Katie, I see you have your hand up, so then we'll come to you. So Lewis, to what extent will you distinguish goals and actions to the various levels at which actions are implemented? State, regional, county, local, and community. So that is a great question, Lewis, and one that we definitely want help thinking through and making sure that we are capturing the type of coordination partnership that is needed to drive on these priorities. So I don't have, a specific answer that I can give in terms of what that will exactly look like, but I appreciate the question, and I think it is something that is going to be really important that we map out in this strategy. I think it's going to be an interesting balance. This is obviously the state's adaptation strategy, but again, the state alone can't take action to reach these priorities. So we're going to have to figure out how to recognize that and create the space while it also is the state's strategy. So Lewis, I don't know if you have additional questions here or comment, follow up. I'll open it up to you and then we'll go to Katie.
Okay, well, I'm thinking of the I in ICARP, and I think it flows down, right, from the state level. It's the way the advisory committees even constituted. It clearly contemplates different levels, right? And a lot of activities happen, resilience actions happen more in the community, neighborhood, local scale. So, and also that was something that was talked about in terms of the survey, that, there was the way it touched down in different places might not be as useful as it could be. So it's just more a suggestion in some way to integrate that, and maybe in the partnerships and collaboration priority or whatever. It's just, I think, something to keep in mind.
Great, thank you very much, Lewis. Okay, Katie, we will hand it to you.
Okay, hi. Oh, sorry. I'm on twice. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, and I'm not getting an echo. I don't know if others are, but it's clear for me.
Sorry, I've just logged in through my phone. How's that? Is that okay? Okay, sorry, everybody. I've been really curious as to the approach around the individual action. I've been working on this platform to try and encourage action, and in talking to people that actually install mini parks and try and get trees planted, I just realized, I actually have no idea how to, if I had to, for example, plant a tree in a yard that was not mine, like where would I even start? If I wanted to make a mini park happen, or perhaps if I, like at my child's school, wanted to do like a white surface or something like that, it's actually kind of pretty hard to figure out where to start. And I was wondering if any parts of the plan, or if there was anybody in this community that really focused on the nuts and bolts of the individual actions, because I see so many of these projects, or just with sustainability in general, like there's a lot of investment in like the data and mapping and with all these different platforms that are out there. But it seems to kind of drop off a bit once you're actually really focusing on implementing the solution. And I'm sort of like after the solution. So you've got all the solutions there. How are you actually like getting people across the line to do it? And the kind of environmental psychology that's around that, like you can't just like tell someone they'll just do it. There's a fair bit of understanding psychology. So I just wanted to ask if anybody was really focused on that, if there are more resources. Also put it out there that this is something I'm really interested in, I work on now, if I can help in any way. Just the real nitty gritty of the action design.
Yes, Katie, appreciate that. And I think just in general, as we, really move into the implementation phase of our climate agenda, really recognizing that, implementation is a lot of hard work, and we need to start unpacking those sticking points and challenges that are, when it comes down to individual project implementation, because that's how we're going to be able to meet our goals here. So I will say, I think at a high level, obviously this is the first conversation we're having, so nothing is, set in stone, but I think at a very high level, this strategy is going to operate at a higher level than I think the individual kind of components that you're looking to get answers to. But what we want is a consistent framework on what we're working towards. So then as we have specific programs or projects that are being implemented with state support, we're driving on those priorities. And I would say, from my perspective and where I sit in state government, really looking to the expertise across our departments and state departments and programs to be able to help unpack those implementation challenges on the ground. So, I don't think this strategy is going to get to kind of listing out individual action, because it's not quite the place for that, but we want to make sure those individual actions are aligned with this broader framework. Amanda, I don't know if you want to add in anything else. I thought maybe you unmuted, but no, okay. Great, so I see John Melvin, you have your hand up. Hello, John.
Yeah, I just thought since I was listening in today, I might respond to Katie as the state urban forester and offer for her to give me a call or an email anytime, and I'd be happy to help you get started. We have technical expertise and partnerships, and we're happy to figure out how to connect you with the right people locally.
Great, thank you, John. Modeling what I've, the value of the expertise across the state. So thank you very much, John. Appreciate that. Okay, Juliet, are there questions that I am missing in the chat here, if you don't mind? And while you're looking, Craig, I see your question. I think I'm going to need to follow up with you offline for that question to be able to give you an answer on that. So maybe we can follow up in either email or set up a conversation to get your answer.
There's a comment from, there's a lot of responses to Katie, and then there's a comment in here which I think is separate from Chuck Mills. This is John Melvin's comment about support the actionable low-hanging fruit. So these are all sort of pinging off of each other. So the original comment was, the low-hanging fruit are multi-benefit solutions that already have the tools and plans to take action. Those do exist now. So that ties into this individual action and sort of the role of the strategy, unless you want to add anything else to that, Untitled.
The only thing I would add is just the connection point to, I think, some of the resilience metrics work that we're doing, where we have got existing action and we've, are able to identify these kind of co-benefits and also early action ideas. We also want to be able to understand and learn from how we are tracking progress there. So just a connection point that, yes, definitely want to be able to highlight those early actions, things that are driving on multiple goals, and then also be able to learn from those on how we can better track and monitor our progress moving forward.
And there's actually up the chain, there was a couple of comments around no new tools, or and so maybe this is a place to also talk about. So for instance, Natalie Hernandez from Climate Resolve has a comment, who's representing Jonathan for this morning's discussion. So less new tools or website, please, more integration. It's overwhelming for nonprofits. So maybe we could talk about the process, which is going to be very stakeholder intensive, et cetera. And so to not have it be that.
Yeah, I would say, Natalie, your sentiment is the kind of one of the central goals and premise of our entire work. We are not looking to build another standalone tool. We are looking to integrate existing tools and data into an integrated platform. So 100% right there with you, and definitely looking forward to engagement on how we do that successfully as we move forward. So that I will, yeah, that I think covers it. Okay, so I'm looking here. So one quick note, I just want to touch on seeing some of the questions here in the chat are around the emissions reduction and climate mitigation piece. And I just want to make clear, and Heather, who I see here has joined us from Cal EPA, please feel free to add on here. But I also just, while we are 100% committed to this driving on an integrated approach across climate and recognizing the interconnections between adaptation and mitigation, we do want to make sure this, our work on the state adaptation strategy is placed in context with the parallel work that's going on the scoping plan, and also just really recognize there are going to be some pieces of obviously the work across adaptation and mitigation that come together between those, but that the scoping plan is the place where the state is charting out how we are driving on our emissions reductions goals and regulations and priorities. So I just want to make that distinction as well, that there are going to be some pieces in the mitigation space that are clearly addressed and housed in this scoping plan, but we want to make sure that as we're driving on adaptation and mitigation, those plans and strategies are speaking to each other. So just to make that clear here in terms of our approach. And I think the timing, will work well in terms of the adaptation strategy kicking off now and the scoping plan kicking off here very soon too. So we'll be able to actually have these coordination conversations. Heather, hello, welcome to, nice to see you. I don't know if you want to,
good to see you all,
but anything you would want to add on that?
No, that was great. Yeah, just these two parallel processes, but we'll be very much in coordination, and we'll be working together very closely on that. Thanks.
Great. Okay, I am going to see, Juliet, any other final questions or comments here in the chat that we have missed?
I don't think so. I think we got everything. Michelle, just put in a comment. I can read it out loud and then maybe you can respond. I'll give you a minute to take a breath. I think a big gap is helping people, institutions, local governments understand how to think about integrating actions to address the range of climate issues, from mitigating to protecting against impacts.
Yes. Agree, Michelle. And I think that's also a spot where, or an important role that our program in general at OPR ICARP plays in helping identify, in addition to, the state strategy, which is going to be one piece, is also then how do we provide the tools and resources and technical assistance to help communities then be able to implement what's in the strategy, what's in the scoping plan, what are in other priority setting documents and frameworks. And so, yes, I think there are many, many pieces that need to come together, and appreciate that, Michelle. So thank you. Okay, so yes. So, Craig, you have a question about timing. So, and moving fast enough. I mean, I will say that, we definitely recognize the urgency for action, both on emissions reduction and adaptation. And so, we know communities across the state are already experiencing impacts. We have been seeing, increased wildfire, catastrophic wildfire, seeing the drought of, a few years ago. And as we enter into additional, into drought-like conditions now. So definitely feeling the urgency. And I think this ties to some of the comments from the earlier council discussion. So I might transition into kind of doing a little bit of a summary of the key themes that I've heard. And then we will pause for our lunch break here. So I think this is a really important piece that we're going to need to balance, which is the urgency for action, responding to, catastrophic wildfire or disaster events, but then also making sure we are building a framework that is addressing these chronic, long-term, also some slow-moving changes that we're going to see from climate impacts. So yes, there's an urgency to take action across all of that right away, but I think we also want to make sure we're setting ourselves up for long-term adaptation and resilience as well. So that is something that I've heard come through this conversation, and appreciate your thoughtful input, especially around the language on some of these draft priorities that we've identified here. A couple other of the themes that I've heard are making sure that we're kind of modeling an integrated and coordinated approach, even in terms of how we're building this strategy. So really appreciate that feedback, definitely centered in exactly our approach and goals here. Definitely recognize the importance of working across scale. That's related to what I just said, but specifically, importance of thinking about our federal partners in this, especially in the land management, and recognizing kind of federal land management, the scale in the state. So noted that. Definitely heard and really appreciate the feedback on the second priority too, around the public health discussion. So appreciate that. Similarly, in the feedback around the first priority around recognizing and calling out explicit actions around protecting climate vulnerable communities, but also building on one of the successes of the last strategy, making sure that equity, environmental justice, and this perspective is carried throughout. So it's not just seen as a separate standalone issue or priority. And then I think, yes, those were some of the main themes that I heard carrying through. And oh, yes, the help nature adapt. Definitely caught the language there on that one. We will continue to really take that to heart and think through ways to adjust and update that language. And then, last theme that I heard was also really making sure we're driving towards a solution space, and making sure that the language here is grounded in kind of a proactive frame rather than just a reactive one. So thank you all very much for this discussion and conversation. We will take all of this really helpful input and saving the chat here so we can respond also to individual comments and questions that require follow-up. We are going to be taking this initial input and helping, having that help us think through the materials that we and the types of questions that we pull together for our stakeholder engagement moving forward over the spring. So really appreciate everybody's time on this. John, I see your hand, so I will have you, weigh in, please.
Yeah, quick thought, just from the council's perspective. The idea of that workshop, of a kind of a workshop format with this group to do a cross-pollination silo breaking down type of an exercise. Just do it internally, but I think that'd be a very useful exercise. Just want to make sure that they get lost.
Yes, no, thank you, John. It is on the to-do list to follow up and think through how we can structure that engagement with our council. I really appreciate that. So yes, not lost. Thank you. Okay, so with that, Juliet, unless I'm missing something we are supposed to do here, I think we can pause for break. Yes, great. So we are going to actually have a little bit longer than an hour break. So we will see everybody back here at 1:30. We're going to keep this link live. So we'll just have this slide up. Feel free to, keep on, or you can log off and then come back, whatever works for you. And then in the afternoon, we're going to do our deep dive workshop around extreme heat. So really looking forward to that part of the conversation. Thank you all. Enjoy your lunch and your break from the Zoom. See you soon. Recording this afternoon session. So we just hit record. Just want to let everybody know we're doing that for our note taking. So we will have that record available for us as we draft up minutes for the meeting. And so everybody, oh, yep, Julia.
We've got a quorum and our presenters, so we're good.
Great. So with that, we will kick it off. Thank you, everybody, again, who is sticking with us through this day of a full day Zoom meeting. Really appreciate everybody's endurance in hanging with us for the day on Zoom. Thank you to everyone who participated in our morning session and provided such helpful and thoughtful feedback on the state adaptation strategy, kind of initial conversation we had there. Really appreciate everybody taking the time. So we are now transitioning into the afternoon session here, where we're really excited to have this public workshop, which is going to be broken out into 2 listening sessions. We will go into more detail on that in a minute, but around the issue of extreme heat. So very excited to kick this off. Next slide, please, Julia. So a little context, apologies for everyone who is on this morning. This is a little bit of a repeat, but I'll make this quick. We did flag this morning as we were teeing up the 2021 update to the state adaptation strategy that we have definitely recognized and have really been listening to stakeholders who have helped identify that extreme heat and developing a strategy on extreme heat and a broader framework is something that is a current gap in the state's approach on adaptation and resilience. And so recognizing that, also recognizing the significant, every corner of the state, every sector within the state will be and already is, already being affected and will continue to be affected by extreme heat. So it really is an impact that every community across the state needs to be thinking about and planning for and taking action to reduce the impacts of extreme heat. I will say also, there's definitely impacts of temperature change that don't show up as extreme heat, but are also really important for us to be thinking about what those gradual changes also mean. So, while we're describing this as extreme heat, definitely want to be able to get insight and thoughts on how we deal with both changes and averages, but also extreme heat events. So that's all part of this conversation here today. So for today, we're really kicking off a discussion where we're really excited to get input from you all on how we can be driving on a more ambitious and coordinated approach on extreme heat, but also learning from our local partners who are already taking action on the ground. So we are going to be joined on the line here by Gary Giroux, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer from the County of Los Angeles, Angeles, and Jacob Alvarez, who's assistant of the city manager in the city of Coachella, and also one of our ICARP council members. So a big thank you to both of you for joining and helping tee up this really important conversation for us today. After the presentations, we're going to go into 2 listening sessions. I'm going to hold off on describing those in too much detail. We'll give more context in a minute, but just wanted to give a quick overview on the our time together this afternoon and what we are hoping to accomplish here. So with that, I will ask for the next slide, and I think I'm handing it over to Amanda Hansen.
Thanks, Nuantara, and thanks to all of you for being here. I apologize if you can hear lawnmowers in the background. Of course, that happened. Anyway, just wanted to frame out, because as I think many of you are engaged in multiple processes, just wanted to attempt to frame out what these listening sessions are intended to inform. So first and foremost, of course, we are going to be integrating what we hear and thinking about how to move the conversation forward as part of our work to develop the state adaptation strategy, which is going to be released later this year. This is also, particularly the second listening session, but the first as well, will be very helpful in informing some of the way that we're thinking about implementing the nature-based solutions executive order. We're coordinating the development of the first strategy for how California might drive greater climate action through work on our landscapes. And we've also expressed interest in sort of scaling our efforts to do more to create, maintain, enhance urban green space to achieve climate and other benefits. There's of course legislation that requires agencies to be considering how our lands can help us achieve the multiple benefits that many of us work toward. And so I think there will be input into that work as well. And then we've also got the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program, which is run out of Nuantara's shop at OPR, identification of 2022 priorities. And finally, these listening sessions and this workshop will inform some of the thinking about how the SGC's climate change research program might prioritize some of its efforts. So if anyone has questions about what all this is connecting to, please let us know. But hopefully that sort of sets the stage for what we're trying to accomplish here.
Thank you, Amanda. Yes, we know there's a lot going on this year and driving on a lot of priorities coming out of the state. And so we just want to make very clear that we are working to integrate these work streams and also making sure that we're being mindful of our stakeholder and partners' time to make sure that as we're collecting your feedback and input, we are going to be integrating that across a whole number of different priorities. So thank you, Amanda, for walking through that. Next slide, please. So with that, I am very excited to hand over the proverbial mic here to our 2 local partners who are going to be helping us frame out providing some perspective, on extreme heat. And really want to thank both Jacob and Gary for joining us today. Really excited to have you help frame out both kind of what's going on the ground across communities in California, and then also where you are finding solutions and taking action to respond to extreme heat. So with that, I will introduce Gary Giroux, who was appointed LA County's first Chief Sustainability Officer in November of 2016. Gary previously served as the president of the Climate Action Reserve and as the vice chair of its board of directors. He also serves on the board of the Los Angeles League of Conservation Voters. Gary's career includes service as the Assistant General Manager for the City of Los Angeles Environmental Affairs Department, and he also managed renewable and energy efficiency programs at LADWP. So with that, I am going to hand this over to Gary to help frame out and provide some context for us here, and then I will hand it to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Nuantara and Juliet, for the invitation. Great to see you both again. And this is the second time this week I've been on a panel with Amanda. So we are talking nature-based solutions here in Southern California to talk about how we address some climate change issues in the role. But I think at first I have to probably change that picture of me because I didn't recognize who that person was that had my name under it. But we'll get there perhaps in the next go around once I can get out of my apartment. So really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to be able to present to the Technical Advisory Committee and be part of the listening sessions. You know, my office was created in 2016, and of course, as someone who was born and raised here in Los Angeles, I've known and experienced heat and other related climate impacts. And you know, I start with this picture of Clayton Kershaw at the 2017 World Series because that was the hottest World Series ever on record, and they've been playing the World Series for over 100 years. It reached 103 degrees at the start of that game, which of course was a night game. And so these are issues that we know and recognize in Los Angeles, and that we understand, of course, are going to get worse as a result of climate change. Next slide. And that, in fact, is the projection, and probably not a surprise to any of you, but really quite dramatic levels of exposure. Even under an RCP 4.5, you can see areas of the San Gabriel Valley in deep red, and under an 8.5, of course, the map at 2080 is just frightening, quite honestly, and millions of people particularly live in the southern part of that map, in the San Gabriel and San Fernando valleys. And so we've been worried about this, thinking about this, and starting to take action since the office was created. So next slide. So we were fortunate early on, actually, and you can just go past that slide to the next one, to partner with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory as part of their EcoStress program. And this is an image taken from space in July of 2018. And again, looking at the map there, you can see the surface temperatures that particular day. And where it's really dark red over, I guess it would be in the upper right, sort of, it was 147 degrees on the ground at the parking lot at Santa Anita. Next slide. And there's Santa Anita. So yeah, 147 degrees on the ground. And we also have an image of the same location, of course, with those mountains behind, actually suffering from wildfire. So we're seeing the combination of climate impacts in our communities, and Arcadia is just one example of where we're seeing that kind of impact. So next slide. And we also actually shared some of that and worked a bit with RAND Corporation as they were doing some heat indexing as well. So we've been partnering from the beginning on our approach to addressing extreme heat. And one in particular is a partnership that was funded through the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation, known as the Southern California Resilience Initiative. And we've had a couple of programs under that, one looking at wildfire risk and urban wildland interface, but also helping us really get a handle on the state of art, the state of science when it comes to addressing heat and our understanding heat vulnerability. So next slide will show you the picture of the report that was produced by researchers at Columbia University at their Center for Resilient Cities and Landscapes. It was actually Joanna Lavecchio who led this study. And she looked at, and her team looked at a number of existing efforts to understand how they could help inform us, whether it was the Trust for Public Lands Climate Smart Cities program, or CalAdapt, or the California Healthy Places Index, really looking at the range of what had been done on heat, and then also identifying a couple of best practices and ending up with making suggestions for the methodology we should be using in our own climate vulnerability assessment. Next slide. We're also have been a proud member of the Climate Insurance Working Group. Next slide. And Kristen Torres-Pauling, who is on our team, has been the county's representative to the Insurance Working Group. This is a working group that was created actually by state law by then Senator Ricardo Lara, who's now Insurance Commissioner, and really looking at how can insurance solutions be tailored to start to address some of the issues, impacts we're seeing from climate change. And Kristen Torres-Pauling serves on the heat committee of that group. And hopefully the report will be coming out very shortly. Next slide. So that's a long way of saying, heat has been part of what we've been working on, but we also, as we've created the office, created a strategic plan for how we address heat or address sustainability across the county. And as part of that, we have a sustainability plan. So next slide. I'm looking at two different screens here for some reason. So as part of our sustainability plan, there are a number of actions that specifically address heat and heat vulnerability. And this is a plan that was adopted by our Board of Supervisors in 2019, but that was really crafted and written with the community, with environmental justice organizations, and from the ground up. We didn't write the plan and take it out for public review, but actually asked people what they thought should be in the plan before we ever put pen to paper. So there are 7 specific actions addressing heat. You can see the first 4 here, looking at just best practices and requirements for cooling centers. Certainly need more shade structures to support pedestrian uses and transit access, and then really looking at tree planting programs as well as a critical element. Next slide. Of course, one big action out of the plan is to implement an urban forest management plan, to develop an urban forest management plan. And we're thankful to the state of California for the financial support for that plan. We're going to be getting started very shortly here on the comprehensive plan, and doing this really in partnership with the city of Los Angeles. And everything in our sustainability plan really is county-wide. It's really meant to be a regional plan. So we're very excited to be able to get started on an urban forest management plan, which not only, of course, provides heat benefits or relief, but a whole range of other important co-benefits. Next slide. Perhaps the most directly relevant action coming out of our sustainability plan, and this is the only pair of actions that have a sub-bullet A and B, but is to conduct a county-wide comprehensive climate vulnerability assessment that both looks at the changes that we're likely to experience under a changing climate. We're using Of course, as you would expect, representative concentration scenarios of 4.5 and 8.5, and looking out to 2050. And so, of course, heat, wildfire, extreme precipitation, drought, inland flooding, sea level rise are all climate impacts that we expect. And we're looking at those both from a physical vulnerability standpoint. So what's the infrastructure here in Los Angeles County, again, countywide, that is vulnerable, exposed to and vulnerable to those changes, as well as, and I think this is the important and innovative part of it, looking at social vulnerability, really trying to understand what populations, including, we've had a series of listening sessions around outdoor workers, people with disabilities, people with limited or access to mobility, rural communities, because we do have a number of rural communities in Los Angeles County and others, to really understand the potential impacts of climate change and specifically extreme heat on those communities. And that will help us in our planning efforts to try to build resilience and adaptive capacity. Next slide. So, and this really talks about what that plan is meant to be. And it's not just to be informing us in the county of Los Angeles, but again, we work closely with cities. We want this to be a tool that cities can use. We want climate or community-based organizations to be able to look at it and really start to dive deep into their own neighborhoods and communities and understand not only, again, the physical infrastructure that's vulnerable, but what populations are vulnerable and how. And it's really, of course, with everything that we do in the LA County Chief Sustainability Office, it's really driven from an equity standpoint. I'll be clear, this is not itself a plan, this is an assessment. So this informs other efforts, including our public safety element of the general plan that is now starting the revision process. This assessment will actually help inform that, as well as any number of other plans, our climate adaptation plan, our hazard mitigation plan, and others. And we expect to be able to release it this summer for review, public workshops, and comment. So, next slide. This just is a representative map coming out of that vulnerability assessment. If you're looking at social vulnerability to extreme heat, this shows a number of places where you'll see significant increases in temperatures. And again, you can see places like Lancaster and North County with a 6-degree change at the 95th percentile maximum exposure, but throughout the entire county, of course. East Los Angeles, Baldwin Park, Reseda in the San Fernando Valley. So really widespread impacts and vulnerabilities to extreme heat. Next slide. And this too, like our sustainability plan itself, we've been doing a lot of stakeholder engagement already. I mentioned some of the listening sessions and the community specifically that were engaging there. We did create an advisory committee. We've engaged tribal and indigenous communities. Held some public workshops already, as well as a city summit, and we'll be holding more of those once the plan itself is completed. And really, this is important for us to not only understand what the social vulnerability is and what the physical vulnerability is to extreme heat, but also to help others understand it. And that's the purpose for this sort of broad community engagement. So the next slide is the last slide, which is where I'll conclude and again say thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. And hopefully that wasn't too much information, and I didn't go over too much over time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that may come up.
Wonderful. No, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Really wonderful to see. And yes, I think, given us lots to think about for our discussion here. So in terms of process, am going to see if there are any quick clarifying questions for Gary on anything he covered, because what I would like to do is also have Jacob Alvarez go through his presentation and then open it up to kind of more substantive questions. And that way we can also have a little bit of a discussion between Jacob and Gary as well. So Jonathan, I see you have your hand raised. Yep, quick clarifying questions, and then we can move to discussion after Jacob's presentation.
Thank you, Nu and Tara. Thank you, Gary, for the presentation. I think it might be helpful for you to announce the county policies on cool roofs and your experiments on cool streets. I didn't see that in the slides, and I think it might be helpful for people to see the advances that you've made.
Yeah, one of it's good. Thanks for the prompt. I appreciate that. One of our initial successes early on was adopting the most stringent cool roof ordinance, I think, in California at the time. It may have since been surpassed, but it really did help drive the market. What we understand from roofing manufacturers is that when the county adopted it for unincorporated areas, which of course is a large swath of the physical geography of LA County, but also covers over 1 million people, that simply became the default roofing product that was offered countywide. So we're proud to have driven changes in the market and really bringing in those cool roofs. So thanks, Jonathan, for that. And then our Public Works Department is looking at the work that has been done in the city of Los Angeles on cool surfaces, specifically streets, but looking at now assessing how we could do that on a neighborhood scale. So if you're familiar with the city of LA's work, they've converted some linear segments and started to gather some data around the potential temperature changes from those linear segments. But our Public Works Department wants to take that work and try it at a neighborhood scale in order to really understand what these changes could bring.
Great, thank you, Gary. So there are a couple questions here in the chat. One of them I think was answered, but Louis, we can come back to that if you have additional in a minute. But maybe one quick question, Gary, for you, and then I'm going to hand it to Jacob, is from Mark Starr. He's curious about who or what the Health Institute rep on the advisory committee might be. So if you can provide a little bit more insight on that.
That's a good question. I think we have an association of hospitals in Southern California. I think it's just, maybe it's statewide. And I believe there's a representative from the Association of Hospitals. There's also representation from our from the Prevention Institute, I believe, are a member of the task force. I'm trying to remember all the task force members, as well as, of course, our Department of Public Health.
Great, thank you. Great, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jacob Alvarez. Jacob, in addition to being a member of our advisory council, and thank you, Jacob, for your continued service and partnership here. Jacob is the assistant to the city manager and joined the City of Coachella's finance department in 2013, where he transitioned from the interim controller to the assistant to the city manager. As the assistant to the city manager, Mr. Alvarez provides supervision on many of the city's special projects and serves as the city's representative on several city-sponsored commissions and committees. He also oversees the city's legislative platform, assists in management of city operations, and also serves as the city's public information officer. He oversees grants management and assists with the city's overall strategy and branding. So many, many hats. Jacob wears many hats. So prior to joining Coachella, Jacob also worked as a management analyst for the Coachella Valley Association of Governments, which is a sub-region to the Southern California Association of Governments. So thank you for joining us here, Jacob, and excited to hear your presentation now.
Thank you. And I'm with Gary. Our pictures look nothing like us anymore. All right. Can you guys hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay, good. And now let me bring up the presentation. All right. Now, can everybody see the presentation?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. So just to begin, I want to qualify that this presentation will present one factor while it takes dozens of factors or approaches to reduce heat within a building envelope. With that, I'll go ahead and get to it. So the Grapefruit Boulevard Urban Greening Project addresses key community identified barriers, issues, and opportunities in our downtown district in order to design and implement complete street improvements, as you could see along Grapefruit Boulevard between Leoco Lane and 9th Street. Now, I don't want to go through that entire list, but the city's downtown is a walkable community and provides pretty much anything that you need. The vacant land near that little purple square box there is currently being developed due to a $15 million Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Grant Award from California's Housing and Community Development, which will provide 105 affordable units, 40 cow vans, and a transit hub. Now on where you saw the red street, which is Grapefruit Boulevard, end caps this downtown district. This is a project that will seek to create innovative green spaces that not only help revitalize the community, but provide environmental benefits while creating social connectivity. Now this street here does have flooding issues, especially when it rains. It's been like this. My grandfather actually used to be a council member and mayor for the city of Coachella back in the 70s and 80s. And if you looked at this street, it pretty much looks the same from back then. Now here's a few project renderings that we have. Let me tell you a little bit about the project. This is a $5.34 million climate resiliency project and was granted $3.19 million, which was the largest award in the state back in October of 2019 by the California Natural Resources Agency Urban Greening Program. The grant was one of 20 infrastructure projects funded by cap and trade funds or revenues, also known as Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Additional funding of $1.37 million also came from the Coachella Valley Association of Governments to assist in street widening, and $250,000 was provided by the Department of Housing and Community Development for traffic signal improvements. The urban greening project improvements will use elements that mimic natural systems by planting 288 trees along Grapefruit Boulevard, along with 1,000 plants, and that will constitute a valuable urban and community forest resource that contributes significantly to human health and quality of life. Beyond the aesthetic value and social well-being, the trees provide essential ecosystem services to clean the air, protect and clean water, support the biodiversity, shelters businesses from blistering summer heat, while assisting in conserving energy. The trees and plants will soften the harsh lines of the city streetscape and help moderate temperatures and solar radiation for our pedestrians and our bicyclists. This slide has our tree and plant design palette. Like I mentioned earlier, we're gonna have about 1,000 plants that we're gonna have to plant. These are native plants and trees that are drought tolerant. The great thing about going through the grant process is that we were provided a iTree planning database, which is a tool that helps us pick the trees and plants that sequester the most data. Originally, we wanted to plant one type of tree to basically stylize the Grapefruit Boulevard, but with the help and understanding of the Department of Natural Resources, this was a big no-no. If for some reason there's a disease or an insect that attacks or starts killing a particular tree, we would lose the whole entire inventory. But rather, since we diversified it, we would only lose a few of those plants or trees. In addition, this would allow for different pollinators to enjoy a plant or tree of their choice and allow for more biodiversity. So this is one of my favorite things here, is that essentially this is providing habitat for our native species and our pollinators. Like our, we have our pink ladies, we have the bees, we have the hummingbirds. My favorite is the roadrunner there. But if you go back to when you were a child and you played the game of which one of these doesn't look like it belongs here, down in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a drip irrigator. Now, drip irrigation has been around for a long time in the desert and is a must. While we may not get much rain, we can support native species through drip irrigation. One thing I like to promote a lot is that we have planned developments or planned communities, or if we're developing or redeveloping parks, we're really trying to push the developer or just us as a city to start urban greening these open spaces to assist and facilitate with our pollinators. Additionally, though we are in the desert, the Coachella Valley could produce up to $600 million of agricultural products each year. And with that being said, you could imagine that our farms are heavily reliant on our pollinators. Now, I know when we talk about where we live, and especially in the past meetings, and we talk about the fires and we have line breaks between houses, most folks know us for Coachella Fest, quite naturally. And when we look, this is actually in our multi-species habitat plan area, but this is what our desert looks like. As you can imagine, it gets pretty hot with us, and even our ice cream trucks can't handle it. Now, animals where you live are nice, cute, and fluffy. Our cute animals look like this. As you can imagine, it's taken thousands of years for them to adapt to our climate. And so we can't just adapt overnight. Well, some of us can, our actors adapt. So shade makes it cooler, as we heard earlier today. Our animals know this. Some of us who go shopping know this. And so the idea, and actually a previous project I was doing for Coachella Valley Association of Governments, was creating a green, assisting and providing more efficiency than what the building code allowed for. And one of these things that wasn't necessary, you didn't get points for, was putting trees in logical places. The room I'm in right now is actually my master bedroom, and it used to be one of the hottest rooms in my home. But once I went through the program or developing the program, I have a tree outside my backyard that I actually let get bigger to block the day's sun, and it actually has become one of the most comfortable rooms in the house. So in the desert, the sun and heat are constantly battling our buildings and our foundations to enter the building envelope. The heat will try to thermal bridge every material on the building, and if any unsealed ceiling will let cold air escape into the attic while allowing hot air into the building envelope. As a result, the facility's air conditioning will constantly kick on to keep the space within the building envelope at the desired thermostat setting. On here, I've actually hijacked this from another presentation I gave, but I think it gives you the kind of the idea of what I'm talking about. Now, I know Gary had mentioned it got 170 something degrees in LA. As you could imagine, the ambient temperature here during the summer will go, we'll hit 128. If you don't have the right type of shoes on and you're walking on asphalt, basically your shoes will either melt or you can feel the heat through the soles of your shoes. So 99 on a hot summer day is actually quite pleasant. But with that being said, if you have a what I'll call as a normal roof,
Sure, thanks.
Mine, yep, thank you. Reminder to keep, if you're not speaking, please mute your line. Thank you.
Thank you, no problem here. So as you can imagine, a normal roof without any, cool roof setting and without any tree in the way, the attic temperature could get up to 177 degrees Fahrenheit. Meanwhile, if you have a light roof or, with a tree that is blocking the direct sun's heat, temperatures could go down all the way down to 111, which is a 66 degree difference. So as you could imagine, if your air conditioner doesn't have to be battling, and if it's not a new facility or it's not a new building, most likely your ceiling isn't going to be sealed in a way that is necessary. You're going to end up losing a lot of, you're going to be air conditioning basically the attic of your building. But that does a great deal. We're currently under construction. As I was going through, I had taken pictures last week of the construction that was under progress. I didn't realize it at the time, but the funny thing about this picture is, you know, people are doing this on their own as well. You can see that there's a huge tree right in front of that building. And that's actually one of the oldest buildings in our city. And that one actually happens to be made out of Adobe. Here's some workers pouring concrete. We are making it ADA compliant, which is very important to us. And then this is just another picture of the work being done. So with that, that's the end of my presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jacob. Really appreciate it. Yes, great job. And as people were saying in the chat, also appreciate the humor. And thank you for showing, you know, it's always now as we're all sitting in our living rooms or wherever we are sitting these days, it's also wonderful to see pictures of across, you know, in Coachella as well as in LA. So thank you for transporting us for a minute here. So with that, we have a few minutes for discussion and question here. I have one question that, you know, for either or both of you, I would love your thoughts on, and you know, we can dig in more on this in the breakout sessions as well. But, you know, I think both of your presentations laid out really helpful context, both from within LA and in Coachella around the local impacts, as well as, you know, actions and discrete actions that you all are taking and that can be implemented on the ground. From my vantage point and from kind of my perspective, I'm really curious from both of you, what are some actions that you think the state could take, or what are some of the key pillars that you think would make a successful state framework for responding to extreme heat, and how can we support your work on the ground? So I know that's a general question, but wanting to get some thoughts going here before we head into the listening sessions.
I guess I could take that question first. The work that I did over at Coachella Valley Association of Governments, we were looking at, again, increasing the efficiency of the building code by 15%. Now, this was back in around 2010, 2011. So whatever the building code was at that time. We were going through a major recession, obviously, and in our community, we tend to not grow as fast as in an empire. We have about a 3-year delay. That being said, you could imagine how the contractors and developers felt about us trying to implement higher efficiencies at a time when they couldn't build anything. The one thing that we did was kind of, you know, throw away the stick, but show them the carrot. And the idea was that eventually, you know, the idea was, are they going to continue to build, or are they going to go completely out of the business and do something different? Because if they are, by 2020, and I think I'm forgetting now, 2025, you had to do net zero building. And so the idea was, let's show you and train you how to do net zero energy building. And it doesn't have to cost the arm and a leg, because obviously they're looking to better their margins. And if we could teach them how to do that in a way that is simple, then they wouldn't feel so threatened by it. So I think a lot of it has to do with when, you know, and it's probably a little bit less now than it was back then, because there was a lot of pushback back then. I think now it probably wouldn't be so much, but it's more about like education and understanding. And I think for local areas, what is a package that they could do to meet those criteria? For us, you know, again, a shaded tree that doesn't cost that much. Orienting in your building, you know, doesn't cost that much. Looking at heat island effect, A lot of times in our area, we build parking lots to basically be like if we're Christmas shopping all year long. And then there's other ways of instead of using asphalt, using, you know, what I would say is like some sort of paver that allows for water to permeate through. And again, that there's that side benefit is one is that you have water that's permeating through and going back into your aquifer. In addition, you're also not getting the radiant heat because now you have some sort of natural soils that absorb the heat. Just things like that. And again, I think if it's emphasized that it doesn't have to cost a lot and it doesn't have to look ugly, I think naturally people will go along for it. A long answer to a short question.
No, thank you, Jacob. It's a big question, so short but big. Thank you, Jacob. Gary, would you like to add in?
Sure. You know, I think some of the things that we laid out in our sustainability plan, of course, are local issues, whether it's zoning to enhance pedestrian access or shade structures at, you know, along streets. Those are typically under the control of the local jurisdiction. But and while they're simple and low-cost solutions, they don't get implemented as often as they should. So I think that, you know, the common answer that that local governments might say how the state can be supportive of a framework is to provide funding, just as you have for the urban forest management plan. Local governments really do need help in just putting shade structures at bus stops and in cities. But I think also, you know, I think there are elements of our vulnerability assessment, I think, that could carry out or forward to a statewide assessment. I think the focus on social vulnerability is particularly critical and with an equity lens. So as you're thinking about your own work in that regard, I would encourage the state to look at the approach that we've taken and adapt it to a statewide effort. You know, I think the other is, you know, when issues of how are we dealing with the risks and vulnerabilities associated with extreme heat come up, and we look to the state, there isn't, of course, a single place. We appreciative of CAL FIRE for the support that they provide us on urban forestry and on greening, and of course appreciative of the Governor's Office of Planning and Research for just all the work around resilience. But you know, maybe centralized coordination of heat-related efforts as a place where we can go and get information and share best practices and really have a single coordinated unified approach would be useful as well.
Great. Well, thank you both for that. There are some great questions in the chat here along the way. So I do want to be mindful of time though, because we want to make sure we've got plenty of time for the 2 listening sessions. And so people can really have the conversation and I think carry some of these questions that are in the chat into that space as well. And I think as people, you know, if people here have answers or any of Gary or Jacob, you want to answer any of these questions in the chat, please feel free. But being mindful of time and really making sure we've got time for everyone to have conversation together, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Jonathan, who has raised his hand, if he has a quick question here, we can respond to that. And then I'm going to hand it over to Amanda to frame out our first listening session so we can head into dialogue there. So Jonathan, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you so much. And it's really not a question, but more of a statement that 90% of California's populations currently live in cities where it's an engineered environment. And the idea of bringing tree canopies into cities is a fantastic idea. And in addition to that, there's no but, it's our view that there has to be a way of dealing with the already engineered parts of where we all live. And our friends, and I'm not even plugging Climate Resolve here, I'm plugging Tree People, and they produced a study that I have now put in the chat which is from the Los Angeles Urban Cooling Collaborative, on how both dealing with reflective surfaces and expanding tree canopy can work in harmony with one another. And I just wanted to introduce that concept because sometimes people think these things are in conflict when in reality they're not. So I just wanted to put that out there as an idea, that this study was very clear. To achieve the greatest benefit for the most Californians, we need to go down both tracks aggressively. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. That was a perfect segue. We didn't just plant Jonathan, because I think that was a perfect example of the types of solutions that we are really looking to get from these conversations. So thank you, Jonathan. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Amanda, who is going to tee up the first listening session here.
Yes, that was quite the setup, Jonathan. I'm impressed. I think the sort of key message that Nuantara and I wanted to convey today is, the topics for this will not be the only workshop that we hold on extreme heat. This is the first of what will probably be a number of convenings that we organize to be able to inform the state adaptation strategy and all of the other things I mentioned at the top of this workshop. But because I had the liberty of helping to craft the agenda, and because I'm working so hard in the natural working land space right now to build out this strategy, I really pressed for us to include a conversation around nature-based solutions early so that it could feed into some of our other efforts. And so 100% agree that there is much more to the extreme heat agenda than simply focusing on nature-based solutions, and that's not our intention here. This is just sort of how we decided to slice and dice our multifaceted conversation. So I will tick through the questions that we've pulled together for our listening sessions. And I think maybe just explain, maybe flesh out a little bit what exactly we're trying to get out of this. The first question, how does extreme heat impact your region? And what are your most urgent concerns? So, we'd love to hear, we don't know how extreme heat impacts our region, and we really need to understand this. Or we know that extreme heat we're very concerned about the nexus between extreme heat and our vulnerable communities, or the nexus between extreme heat and our biodiversity. This is really just to get a sense from all of you on sort of where are your priorities, what are your needs, what are the most urgent concerns that you have in this space, even if the concern is, we don't know what to be concerned about. The second question, what are key pillars of a successful state framework for responding and adapting to extreme heat, and how could such a framework most usefully support local and regional action? So the sort of meat of what we're trying to get at here is the various components of what a strategy on extreme heat should contain. So, vulnerability assessments, technical assistance, public awareness raising, early warning systems. Like, what are the things that you think should be considered for inclusion in an extreme heat framework? And then the second part of the question really is around, like, how could that framework most usefully support local and regional action? So we want this to be something that can reflect and reinforce your priorities. The third question, what will gradually increasing temperatures mean for your region, and what actions are needed now to build long-term resilience? I think we would just love to know your thoughts on what you think extreme heat will mean for you, and how we can act now to ensure that the worst of what that could look like does not happen. Or if there's things that you would like to know about increasing temperature impacts, or any information gaps related to actions that can be taken to reduce risks from extreme heat. Fourth question, what is the role of the state in addressing extreme heat, and who else needs to take action and how? Now, this was really our way of sort of saying the state is one player, and we want to do our part. We want to understand, what that part looks like, how that part could be most useful to all of you, but also to understand, how we can partner with other key actors, learn from other key actors, and have really sort of a feedback mechanism where our collective action is sort of moving in the right, all the same direction. So those are the sort of background of what these 4 questions are, and really excited to hear what everyone here has to say. So thank you again. And I don't know who to hand it over to now. I'm going to go with Nuantara.
Yep, I am going to hand it to Juliet, who is going to help us organize into our breakouts here.
I'm double muted, sorry. I'm so paranoid about being the person that mutes or doesn't mute. Yes, so Nikki, I'm not handing it again. Nikki has been behind the scenes, Nikki Caravelli from our team over at OPR has been busy putting everybody into breakout rooms. I'm gonna stop sharing just for a second. So as you go into the rooms, we're gonna have about 45 minutes in the room. Don't go yet, I'll give instructions because I see that they're popping up. You will have a facilitator and then a note taker, and we're going to guide you through these questions. At the end of that, we'll come back and then kind of do a quick, the facilitators will give a 1 to 2 point highlight of what was discussed in the room. We'll get our next set of questions from Amanda and Nuantara, and then we'll go back into the room. So here's where we get to really address all the great stuff that we've been seeing coming through the chat. So have fun. We will be back in about 50 minutes. See you soon. Thank you so much.
Great. Hello, everybody. I think we're still coming back together here in this main space together. Thank you all for your conversations. I hope they all went well. We had a very great full conversation with lots of great ideas and thoughts and observations. So thank you all. Excited to hear a quick update. So Juliet or Nikki, are all the breakout groups back together here, or are we waiting?
We are all back.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nikki. Okay, so now we'll do this very quickly, asking each of the facilitators from the breakout to report out on one of the key points that was, in the interest of time, I think, we'd ask facilitators to identify 3 to 5, but I might just ask, top 1 or 2 kind of key points or messages, discussion points that came out of your group discussion. So Nikki or Juliet, can we just ask facilitators, or did you have a process here that you want to call on people?
I think, well, you're a facilitator, so if you want to go and then you can toss it to me and then I'll call the others. Or if you want me to go for it.
Yes, great. Yeah, so we had a great conversation. I think 4. Well, no, I have to follow my own rule and example. Okay, 2. I'm going to 2 key points. One was we talked a lot about the need for funding, both kind of funding at scale, but also making sure that funding is being prioritized to areas with the greatest need, but also, you know, where that need capacity to be able to take action. The second piece that was an interesting part of our conversation was the need to focus on extreme heat, but also recognize that we need to be doing that in context of other climate impacts. For example, there was a nice discussion and description of some of the interventions on extreme heat could potentially cause, you know, negative impacts, for example, around smoke. So directions for people to kind of close up windows for smoke and health, air quality benefits could cause problems in extreme heat around other negative health impacts. So just a quick example that we need to also be thinking about our solutions in context of other climate impacts. I will hand it over to you, Juliet.
Great, excellent. So yeah, of course, we talked about funding too, but the other thing that, as one of the pillars in terms of what the state can provide, is that a recognition that what we do best, or one of the things we do well at the state, is to enable the work to happen. And so where we can be helpful, I guess it is a money thing because it's providing grants, but it's also the technical assistance and also sort of the policy knowledge that we can then transfer into the local space. And the other, just I'm going to try not to break my own rules. The other point that was made that everyone in the room really appreciated was just showing the value of doing things in not your backyard. So you may want to, you know, you may see the value in clearing the, you know, creating the defensible space where you are, but you may not understand the value of that happening 200 miles away. And so helping make that connection between the fact that that's also really important, the stuff that isn't happening in your backyard, because that's where the clean water is, and sort of that whole connection that we have, sort of the teleconnections of the life we live. So those were the points. So hopefully I did my room justice. Go to Amanda, if that's okay.
Yes, I'm also going to break the rule, but I'll be quick. So also had a really good discussion. I think the three things that these are just three, but there was many other things that came up. One is, I think, overarching, it's important that the state makes clear that this is a priority. Two, ensure that the public awareness campaign includes visuals. This is something that's like not always easy to necessarily understand, but pictures can really help this issue resonate with people. And then number three is to focus investments where they're needed the most, and that a state role is really to help sort of provide local and regional entities with data and information needed for action on the ground, including, you know, economic analysis on avoided costs. So I will stop there and thank my group.
Thank you, Amanda. Next, we have Clessy.
Okay, I'm going to try to do this quick. We had a really awesome discussion as well. I think one issue that came up throughout all of the questions was that these impacts are disproportionately impacting vulnerable communities and marginalized communities, and the need to prioritize these communities in the solutions. Also that building equity and building community is a form of building resilience. We talked about the need to build authentic trust with communities who have been historically redlined when carrying out these projects. Another big thing that came up all the time was the need for funding, that we need to provide a lot. All of our grants are oversubscribed, and we have, you know, a slashed budget this year for urban greening. In addition, also not just money for implementation, but for monitoring and for maintenance of these projects to ensure that they are actually successful in the long term. And the last thing I'll say is just the need for coordination among our state agencies who work on topics related to this issue, to coordinate with each other, but also creating some kind of hub or something for local governments to learn from each other. I will stop there, even though there's so much more.
And you already totally broke the rules, but that's okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Great. It's hard not to. So Biha, you're next.
Sure. And I'll ditto what a lot of you all have already said. I think we heard a lot about funding, but also funding combined with technical assistance. One thing we talked about was in talking about the state's role was the relationship that the state has with utilities and how that relationship comes into play, especially when we're talking about extreme heat. And then another item I'd like to highlight is how extreme heat can often exacerbate the economic impacts and how that has an effect on mental health. For instance, there was an example about sometimes it's a matter of affording housing in areas that are cooler. And then it's also about access to outdoor activities. Sometimes those are halted, like sports or visiting the beach. And the effects of that on individuals' mental health can really halt productivity. And when we're talking at like high levels, I think it's also important to elevate those concerns around mental health. And then also I'll highlight that there's a real, in talking about those more vulnerable populations, there's a real want for those populations to be given some of this authority to do this work. And so then it's also on the state to provide some of that, shift those decision-making power, and then provide the capacity for, and partnering with those CBOs and local governments to move this work forward. Thanks to my group.
Thanks, Adia. Okay, next we have Leah Fisher.
A lot of what we were gonna pull out has been shared already. So funding, I will just add, also tied to the metrics and to the state framework. So not stopping with the metrics, but trying to tie it to funding and programs. I've definitely talked about vulnerable communities, prioritizing that. Also the need for local data and tools at a very local level so that it can be used in local decision-making. And then we talked about how integrated all these topics are, and we especially hit on water and some conflicts that could come up, energy and transportation, and just how you can't separate them. So we do have to think of a state framework that brings all of these together. And then finally, I want to give a shout out that was raised to the importance of native plants, especially as we think about these conflicts that could arise with water and other things. And the state could consider requiring use of native plants in programs, which may already happen. I'm not aware. Thanks. Thanks to my group too.
Thank you. Everyone's just getting more efficient at breaking the rules. These are way over 1 to 2 points, but it's great. Aaliyah.
Okay, I'm going to follow suit and break the rules too, but I'll talk really fast. So let's see the key points. And again, I think this was really an interesting conversation, and we touched on a lot that was already raised. I think some of the bigger points are really recognizing the linkages across climate impact areas, including, the lack of resources in particular communities, and how that's affecting, access to the appropriate utilities and infrastructure to really be resilient as a community, but also the co-benefits that can come from addressing this issue, across the state and at various levels. So we really talked a lot about creating partnerships across sectors and across jurisdictions, looking to the private sector, the public at a more grassroots level, and kind of recognizing that nexus to industry and development and housing, also healthcare and public health oriented organizations, but really creating like a framework and bridging off of existing frameworks to share across so that we can learn from each other and continue to share, lessons learned. And let's see, there was definitely a big emphasis on measuring the progress, but also particularly focusing on the most vulnerable communities that do lack access to the appropriate cooling resources. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. And wow, we have a lot of facilitators. Taylor, it'll go Taylor, Nicole, and then Mark.
Yeah, I can keep mine short. I think circling back to what Amanda's group covered, I found a lot of commonalities there. We spoke a lot about the state's role as kind of like a provider of projection data, and also a like educator and like awareness and its tool and like raising awareness. So both kind of covering like the severity of the risk and kind of the extent of the impacts of extreme heat now, but also in the future, and making sure local leaders and local stakeholders are kind of aware of that as they go about making decisions. And then also providing forums where we can like share best practices and encourage investment in mitigating and adapting to the impacts of extreme heat, and how we can kind of create like dual benefits from investments made in that area.
And to Nicole.
Hi, so my group provided great feedback and insights to this issue. Two long but main points that I'm going to make is that extreme heat needs to be amplified as a more serious issue. There needs to be more awareness at all levels, especially leadership and the legislature as well, to really make sure that that this issue is amplified so we can take more immediate action. And that includes a need for more data and capacity to have this data on the current extreme heat impacts. And for example, we need more data on extreme heat illness and what that in the public health sector and how that can help amplify this issue as well. And there was also a call for more pilot projects that we need to take an integrated approach to combine these mitigation efforts. And so more pilot projects means that we can also, have more data on what works, what doesn't, things like that. And of course, all these efforts need to be done equitably and target the most vulnerable communities, and that we should also be tracking how different efforts are also influencing displacement and how that's also a very important issue as well.
Great, and to Mark.
Yeah, I'll go really quick. Well, shout out to Jennifer, Michelle, Jason, and Rob. We had an excellent discussion. Really appreciate it. The one thing that I'll just capitalize on, which has already been mentioned, it was the first thing that Nicole mentioned, was really the culture around extreme heat, and how recognizing that the shift in culture that needs to take place with the state in talking about this issue, and really these conversations are sort of the start of that culture shift, but then also recognizing the limited amount of time in creating that culture shift. So lots of other good points, but I'll keep it short.
Fabulous. Thank you. Lots of diversity in what we were hearing. So I will bring up the next set of slides, and then I think it goes back to you, Nuantara or Amanda. Lost track.
I think Amanda.
I think it's me, and I'll be super fast. So we're now transitioning over to listening session 2. This is sort of a more refined and focused conversation within the broader context of things that we can do to address extreme heat, and really focus on what is the role of nature-based solutions in cooling communities and building resilience. So this first question, what we're really trying to drive at is to gauge from all of your perspectives what benefits these kinds of investments can deliver beyond necessarily addressing extreme heat. This is important for us as we think about, we prioritize multi-benefit investments. So this will help us understand the benefits that you all see from nature-based solutions in communities. Next slide. Question. Please share the most significant barriers to implementing these solutions, and if possible, recommendations to address them. So, clearly we are driving on the governor's request that we accelerate our action in this space. So to the extent that there are challenges in implementing nature-based solutions, we would love to hear what those challenges are, and if you have recommendations, that would also be very helpful. And this will inform some of the actions we would commit to in the context of the state adaptation strategy, and also maybe in our climate smart land strategy. So, and then get built into some of our grant programs and other state efforts. Question 3. How can actions to accelerate the uptake of nature-based solutions in California communities strategically support low-income, disadvantaged, vulnerable populations? We'll just this obviously came up a lot in our conversations about extreme heat broadly, but if there are anything that you'd like to add as it relates to nature-based solutions in these communities, it would be helpful for us to understand that. And then the fourth question, are there workforce needs and opportunities in this sector? So, you know, as we think about ways to, I'll just say, you know, we've heard a lot that tree planting and shading is important. I've also heard a lot that a lot of cities and local municipalities do not have the capacity to adequately maintain these trees. And so, you know, is there a need for people to do that kind of work? What other, you know, nature-based industries might we hear about from all of you to help think through other ways that the state can sort of accelerate certification programs or create workforce development training? We would like to be able to think about how these solutions can also support our economic recovery and just our economy more broadly. So those are some of the background behind the questions, and I think we'll go straight into our groups now. Nikki.
Hi, Nikki. I keep getting kicked off. I'm sorry. And I have really loud construction.
That's okay. What do you want to do?
I was in the room with Taylor and Amanda, if you want me to go there.
Okay. I don't have a strong preference. So see you there. Hello, everybody. We are slowly coming back, I think, or quickly coming back. Everyone should be back now. Wonderful. Great. So Juliet, yes. You want to kick us off? I think we have all learned that all of the facilitators, in spite of our best effort, we are not good at following our own instructions, our own rules. So we have a timer here now because we also want to respect everybody's time, especially those of you who have been with us since 9:30 this morning. So we are going to follow our own rules here. Juliet, you want me to try to model again? Okay, I'm ready, set, go. I have one really insightful point that was made in our group, which was seeing cooling as the start, as the beginning, but the goal is to really create communities that are thriving. And so we need to be thinking both at the individual level, but also at scale. And how do we provide, really these conditions so that communities can thrive at scale? Okay, I'm done. I don't know who's going next, but your time started.
I was so that I forgot to check the list. I'm just going to go off the top of my head. Nicole. Oh no, you're muted.
Oh no, I'm muted. I'm sorry. Okay, just that nature-based solutions provide many great benefits. We should be looking at an equity lens, but also I think one big thing that was highlighted was just education on the benefits of urban greening, but also to listen to the communities and really figure out what they want and in terms of the different types of urban greening that's out there. And also we need more information on different types of plants that we should use.
Nicely done. All right, we'll go Mark and then Amanda. Give you a little heads up.
Oh shoot, a little heads up. Well, we were joined by John. Thank you, John, for joining our discussion. I think main points, just a really exciting time for nature-based solutions, really growing and starting to be incorporated into the mainstream language of how we're talking about these different issues. Talked a little bit about kind of shifting the mindset from strategic to tactical to really focus on an action-oriented perspective. And we'll cap it there.
Excellent. Amanda, then Aaliyah.
Actually, Taylor was our moderator, our facilitator.
Oh, there you go, Taylor.
Yeah, we covered a lot in this breakout, but one of the things that really stuck was like, where are nature-based solutions? How are they different than like the way we may traditionally conceive of them? And also their benefits. Like beyond even direct climate mitigation, like how can they foster community belongingness and happiness and improve the quality of lives of people as well? Great discussion. Thank you for everyone in the room.
Wow, with time to spare. Amazing. Okay, so Aaliyah and then to Fabiha. I don't know. I know we mix up rooms, so.
Great. Okay, so this is really difficult. So we talked in terms of nature-based solutions, we talked a lot about, in addition to the ecological benefits, there's a lot of public health benefits, but also really focused on the mental health benefits and how it can foster a sense of safety and well-being. On the co-benefit line of thought, a lot of community-led efforts came up, such as creating a community garden or school gardens and some of the educational opportunities there. I'm out of time.
I think I said Fabiha and then Leah.
Okay, great. So I'll highlight a couple points. Urban heat, folks want urban heat or extreme heat to really be prioritized in our budget. There are programs at the state that promote nature-based solutions, but they're oversubscribed. And then there's also a need for TA because these complicated programs create a capacity issue for the most vulnerable communities that need to access that funding. And there also needs to be a shift towards action-oriented next steps, which I believe Mark's group talked about.
Great.
I love this speed round. You said me next, right, Juliet? I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then Classy.
Shoot. Sorry. Okay. We got into the benefits of social cohesion with nature-based solutions. So how do you design things well that across sectors and so they'll actually be used, which gets to community input. We did talk about green schoolyards as an example of a solution that should be considered, and a multi-purpose one that can create jobs. And then also to think about the natural environment, not just the built, but what is natural there, wetland, et cetera, and how can that play a role?
Sorry, my computer buzzed you before the buzzer went. Classy, and I don't know who's left, but I will find out. So Classy.
Okay, there was one main theme that really went throughout our whole conversation in the afternoon, which was that nature-based solutions, and specifically we're talking about urban trees, should be treated as necessities and part of the infrastructure and not as amenities, that we should be thinking about these things the same way that we think about roads and fire hydrants and other pieces of infrastructure. That's it. Thanks.
Amazing. I think that's everybody. Did I miss someone?
No, amazing. Thank you all. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed the sessions. I know I got a lot out of this and really want to thank everybody for taking the time to spend your day with us and for this workshop. Really appreciate everybody's really thoughtful, insightful comments and insight into this. As Amanda mentioned, this is the start to the conversation, definitely not the end. So appreciate you bringing your brainstorming thinking caps over to this space today to get us started. This was a great kickoff to this conversation. So because we are wrapping this up as part of our council meeting, we will transition from this agenda item to a general public comment. So anybody is welcome from the public to weigh in if you have any general public comment you'd like to share with us. I will ask that if you do, to please raise your hand, use the hand raise feature, or you can use the thumbs up or however you want to get our attention. So I see one. I see Rico, you have your hand up. So I will hand it to you for a quick public comment.
Can't find my unmute button.
You're unmuted. I can hear
you.
you.
I am unmuted. Okay.
Yep.
Listen, there was a question 3. I don't have it in front of me, so I can't see it right now. But if we're serious about addressing heat as quickly as possible, and obviously we need to. I mean, 2020 was the hottest year on record. There's no money for urban greening in the 2021-22 budget. There's very little for urban forestry. Those are our 2 nature-based heat solution programs that are extremely successful and oversubscribed. Put money in the May revise. If you want to get money on the ground to address this before 2023, because that's what we're looking at, and if we're counting on a climate bond, put money in the May revise to signal that this is as important as this conversation suggests it is, or that science tells us it is.
Great. Thank you very much, Rico. Appreciate that. Any other comments here before we wrap up for the day? Okay. Seeing none, definitely we're captured all through the course of the day, everything that's been in the chat. So appreciate that very much, everybody's contributions there. So with that, I'm going to say a very big thank you again to everyone who has been here with us all day. And for those who just joined in the afternoon, thank you for your insights and contribution. And with that, we will adjourn the meeting and see you all at our next meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Happy weekend.
Thank you.
Save your chats.